My name is Nia. I am 28 years old, and I had just been discharged from the hospital after an emergency C-section when my husband told me to take the public bus home in the freezing rain. He claimed he was too busy closing a $5 million deal to pick me up. But while I stood bleeding and shivering on the pavement with our 2-day-old daughter in my arms, he was secretly driving a brand new Mercedes Maybach to take his entire family out for a lavish feast. What he did not know was that 1 hour later, he would be completely bankrupt, and the revelation of my true identity would terrify his entire family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth and treated you like garbage. Now let me tell you how the collapse of his fake empire began. The automatic sliding doors of Atlanta Medical Center closed behind me with a quiet thud, sealing off the warmth of the lobby. Instantly, the biting wind of a harsh November morning cut through my thin sweatpants and the oversized jacket I had hastily thrown on. I shivered violently, my arms instinctively tightening around the small, fragile bundle resting against my chest. My daughter Maya was barely 48 hours old. She was wrapped in a standard-issue hospital blanket, sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the turmoil swirling around her mother. Every single step I took sent a searing, white-hot pain radiating from my abdomen. The emergency C-section had left me physically wrecked, and the doctors had strictly instructed me not to lift anything heavy or strain myself. The discharging nurse had kindly offered to wheel me all the way to the passenger side of my husband's car. I had politely declined, assuring her with a bright, convincing smile that DeAndre was waiting just outside the drop-off zone. I had been so sure he would be there. I had texted him 3 hours ago when the doctor signed my release papers. He had replied with a quick thumbs-up emoji. But as I stood on the concrete curb, scanning the endless sea of vehicles idling in the passenger pickup area, there was no sign of him. I shifted my weight, wincing as a fresh wave of agony washed over my incision. The cold wind was merciless. It whipped my uncombed hair across my face and chilled my bones. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The heavy hospital bag slung over my shoulder felt like it was filled with lead, dragging me down, pulling at my stitches. Other mothers were being wheeled out, greeted by beaming husbands holding balloons and car seats, eagerly helping their new families into warm vehicles. I stood alone, a stark contrast to the joy surrounding me. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely unlock my phone. I dialed DeAndre's number. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I dialed again, and again. On the 5th attempt, the line finally clicked open. Instead of the apologetic voice of a rushing husband, my ear was flooded with a chaotic symphony of noise. Upbeat jazz music was blaring in the background. I could hear the distinct crisp clinking of crystal champagne flutes and roaring laughter. Above it all, I heard the shrill, obnoxious cackle of my sister-in-law, Keisha. "Hello," DeAndre snapped, his voice tight with irritation as if I were a telemarketer interrupting his day. "What is it, Nia? I am in the middle of something extremely important right now." "DeAndre, where are you?" I asked, my voice cracking as a gust of wind made me hunch over to protect Maya. "I have been standing outside the hospital lobby for almost half an hour. It is freezing out here. My stitches hurt. I need you to come get us." A heavy sigh echoed through the phone, followed by the sound of him covering the receiver, though not well enough. I heard him mutter to someone nearby, "Giving me 1 second, she is being dramatic again." When he spoke to me next, his tone was dripping with condescension. "Nia, we talked about this. I told you today was a massive day for the company. I am sitting at a table right now closing a $5 million deal with top-tier investors. You know how hard I have been grinding to secure this funding? I am building our future, and you are nagging me about a ride." I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to hold back the hot tears of frustration that threatened to spill over my freezing cheeks. "DeAndre, I just had major surgery. I am holding our newborn daughter in the freezing cold. You promised you would be here at 10 in the morning. If you could not make it, why did you not just tell me so I could make other arrangements?" "Look, I lost track of time, okay?" he replied defensively, The world does not revolve around you just because you gave birth. Women have babies every single day. Stop acting like you are the first person to ever do it. Just call an Uber and go home. I will see you tonight. I pulled the phone slightly away from my ear, staring at the screen in disbelief. Did he really just say that to me? I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to keep my voice steady. DeAndre. I cannot call an Uber. My debit card was declined at the cafeteria yesterday, remember? I transferred all my freelance money into our joint savings account so we could pay the hospital bills. I do not have access to the credit cards. You have to send a car for me. Use your business account. I cannot do that, he snapped instantly. The corporate card is maxed out until this deal closes. I have to keep my liquidity high for the investors. Just take the city bus. The stop is literally right around the corner from the hospital. It is a straight shot to our apartment. It builds character, Nia. Stop being so incredibly needy. Take the bus. 2 days after my stomach was sliced open, with a newborn baby. I opened my mouth to argue, to scream, to beg him to show a shred of humanity, but before I could utter a single word, the line went dead. He hung up on me. I slowly lowered the phone. The physical pain in my abdomen was suddenly completely eclipsed by a deep hollow ache in my chest. For the past 2 years, I had played the role of the quiet, supportive, financially struggling wife. I had maintained my cover as a simple freelance accountant, hiding my true background, all to ensure that the man I married loved me for my heart and not for the billion-dollar generational wealth my family commanded. I had tolerated his arrogance, his obsession with looking wealthy, his constant need to project a fake high-class lifestyle on social media. I had even tolerated his disrespectful, snobby family who constantly looked down on me because they thought I was a poor orphan. I had endured all of it because I believed that deep down DeAndre loved me. I believed that when it truly mattered, when our child was born, he would step up and be a father. Standing there on the freezing pavement, the bitter truth finally shattered my carefully constructed illusion. He did not love me. He did not care about our daughter. He only cared about his image, his ego, and his desperate pursuit of a lifestyle he could not actually afford. I looked down at Maya. She stirred slightly in her blankets, letting out a tiny, soft sigh. A protective fire ignited in my blood, burning away the cold, burning away the sorrow, leaving only a sharp, razor-focused clarity. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my hand. It was an automated text message from our bank. I swiped the screen to open the notification, expecting it to be a low balance warning or a routine update. Instead, the words on the screen made my blood run completely cold. Alert. A withdrawal of $15,000 has been processed from your joint savings account, ending in 4821. Current available balance is $0.00. I stared at the numbers, my brain struggling to process the magnitude of the betrayal. $15,000. That was every single penny I had painstakingly saved from my freelance accounting gigs over the last 9 months. That was the money meant for Maya's diapers, her crib, her formula, and my maternity leave. It was the money I had sacrificed sleep and comfort for working late into the night with a swollen belly, just so we would have a safety net that fit my fake middle-class profile. DeAndre had drained it. He had taken every last cent. While I was lying on an operating table having my flesh cut open to bring his child into the world, he was transferring my hard-earned money out of our account. While he was telling me he was broke and forcing me to take a public bus with a newborn, he had $15,000 of my money sitting in his pocket. The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. The jazz music, the clinking champagne glasses, the loud laughter of his sister Keisha, the $5 million deal he claimed he was closing. It was all a lie. He was not in a boardroom. He was at a restaurant. And he was funding his flashy, fake, wealthy lifestyle using the money he had stolen from his own newborn daughter. The tears that had been pricking my eyes completely evaporated. The weak, accommodating, people-pleasing version of Nia died right there on the concrete curb of the hospital loading zone. In her place, the true heir of Vanguard Holdings awoke. I did not scream. I did not break down crying. I simply adjusted my grip on my daughter, ensuring she was warm and secure against my chest. I looked at the long gray street stretching out ahead of me, leading toward the public bus stop. He wanted me to take the bus. He thought he had left me powerless, stranded, and financially ruined. He thought I was just a naive, broke orphan who would quietly absorb his abuse and come crawling home. He was wrong. He had just made the most catastrophic mistake of his pathetic life. I began walking toward the bus stop, ignoring the stabbing pain in my stomach. Every step I took was no longer a step of defeat. It was a countdown. I was going to take that bus ride, but the destination was not our cramped apartment. The destination was his absolute destruction. The walk to the bus stop felt like a march through broken glass. Every gust of wind battered my exhausted body, but I kept my posture straight, using my oversized coat as a shield for Maya. When the heavy diesel engine of the city bus roared up to the curb, the doors hissed open, releasing a blast of stale, warm air. I gripped the metal handrail. Pulling my own weight up those 3 steep steps sent a fresh, blinding jolt of agony straight through my abdominal stitches. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper, refusing to let out a single sound of weakness. I fumbled for my transit card with shaking fingers, swiped it, and shuffled down the narrow moving aisle. The bus was crowded, packed with exhausted people heading home from their early shifts. The air smelled of damp wool, old coffee, and exhaust fumes. A kind older black woman with deeply lined, tired eyes immediately stood up from her seat near the front, gesturing for me to sit. I gave her a grateful nod, slowly lowering myself onto the hard plastic seat. The engine grumbled, and the bus lurched forward abruptly, throwing me against the cold glass window. I adjusted Maya, wrapping her tighter in her blankets. She let out a small, fragile whimper, her tiny face scrunching up against the cold air that drafted through the poorly sealed window. I unbuttoned the top of my jacket, tucking her closer to my bare chest to share my body heat. Every time the bus hit a pothole, a sharp, white-hot spike of pain shot through my pelvic region, reminding me of the layers of muscle and tissue that had been sliced open just 2 days prior. I felt a warm dampness spreading across my lower abdomen and prayed my stitches were not tearing. I was a billionaire heiress sitting on a public transit bus, physically broken and bleeding, while the man who swore to protect me was nowhere to be found. To keep my mind off the burning pain in my stomach and the betrayal twisting my heart, I pulled my phone back out of my pocket. I just needed a distraction. Anything to stop my brain from replaying the cruel sound of DeAndre hanging up on me. I tapped the Instagram icon. The very first thing that popped up at the top of my feed was a live video from my sister-in-law, Keisha. The title flashing across the screen in bold neon letters read, "Celebrating my brother making boss moves at Le Bijou." My thumb hovered over the screen, completely paralyzed. Le Bijou was the most exclusive, ridiculously expensive French restaurant in the entire city of Atlanta. Getting a table there required months of waiting or thousands of dollars in bribes. I tapped the video. Instantly, the screen filled with the bright, flashing lights of Keisha holding her phone up high, capturing the entire private VIP dining room. "Oh, we are doing it big today, y'all," Keisha yelled into the camera. Her lips glossed and her edges laid perfectly. "We only do luxury in this family. Nothing but the best for the boss of the city." She panned the camera around a massive mahogany table draped in heavy white linen. There they all were. My mother-in-law, Vivian, was sitting in the center chair, wearing a ridiculous feathered fascinator hat that she probably bought on credit, sipping vintage champagne with her pinky extended. Next to her sat my brother-in-law, Trey, and his sharp-tongued, hypercritical wife, Jada. The table was absolutely covered in extravagant dishes. I saw towers of chilled, fresh seafood butter, roasted lobster tails, imported beluga caviar, and multiple bottles of high-end crystal champagne chilling in silver buckets. And sitting at the head of the table wearing a brand-new custom-tailored velvet suit was my husband, the man who had just told me he was too busy and too broke to afford a $20 Uber ride for his wife and newborn child. My stomach churned, a sickening mixture of physical pain and absolute disgust. I watched through the tiny glowing screen as DeAndre stood up holding a crystal glass high in the air. "Let us make a toast," he announced smoothly, projecting his deep voice perfectly for Keisha's audience. "To the new $5 million Vanguard Holdings deal. To taking the family empire to the next level." Vivian clapped her hands together, beaming with fake aristocratic pride. That is right, my brilliant son. We always knew you were destined for greatness. You have the mind of a true mogul. Not like some people who just hold you back and drain your energy. I knew exactly who she was talking about. Jada chimed in, leaning across the table with a smug, condescending smile. Honestly, DeAndre, it is about time you treated yourself to the life you deserve. You work far too hard to be chained down by mediocrity. Speaking of treating ourselves, where is that surprise you promised us? DeAndre flashed $1 million smile, reaching down under the table. For my favorite sister-in-law, he said, pulling out a bright orange Hermes shopping bag. He tossed it onto the table in front of Jada. She shrieked with genuine delight, tearing into the luxury packaging to pull out a pristine leather designer handbag. I recognized the model instantly. It was a bag that easily cost $5,000 or $6,000. But wait, there is more, Keisha squealed, turning the camera back to her own face. Tell them about the new ride, big bro. Let them know how we pull up. DeAndre leaned back in his chair, looking incredibly pleased with his own reflection in the camera. Oh, you know we had to upgrade the fleet for the new era. The brand new Mercedes Maybach is sitting in the valet outside right now, matte black on black. Like I said, only the absolute best for this family. I sat completely frozen on the shaking, noisy bus. I stared at the red live icon pulsing in the corner of the video. It was happening right now, at this very second. The math hit my brain with the devastating force of a freight train. The butter-roasted lobster, the vintage crystal champagne, the custom-tailored velvet suit, the brand-new Hermes bag, the massive down payment required to lease a matte black Maybach just to flex for an Instagram audience, $15,000. The exact amount he had drained from my secure savings account 10 minutes ago. He did not close a $5 million deal. Vanguard Holdings had not approved his business funding yet. I knew that for an absolute undeniable fact because Vanguard Holdings was my family's private company. I was the sole heir and the shadow chairwoman. Just last week, I had personally told my uncle, the public-facing CEO, to put DeAndre's corporate application on hold until after I gave birth so I could review the numbers myself. DeAndre was faking his massive success. He was playing the role of a wealthy, untouchable mogul for his mother, his sister, and his thousands of superficial social media followers. And he was funding this pathetic smoke and mirrors masquerade with the money I had painstakingly saved to buy our daughter a crib. That $15,000 was not just money. It was late nights staring at glowing spreadsheets until my eyes burned. It was skipping meals so I could deposit an extra $50 into the bank. It was wearing the exact same worn-out maternity clothes for 9 entire months so I could build a secure safety net for my child. I had played the role of a struggling lower-middle-class wife to absolute perfection. I had hidden my massive trust fund, my international properties, and my true identity because I wanted a man who loved me for my mind, my loyalty, and my heart, not my investment portfolio. DeAndre had convinced me he was a hardworking, grounded entrepreneur trying to get his humble startup off the ground. He had convinced me we were building a solid life together from the bottom up. But it was all a calculated scam. He was a parasite, a leech obsessed with the aesthetic of generational wealth, completely devoid of the actual work ethic required to achieve it. He was a pathetic little boy playing dress-up with money he stole from his own newborn daughter. As I watched Jada parade that stolen Hermes bag across the screen, bragging about her high-class taste, something inside my soul completely snapped. The deep, heavy sadness that had been crushing my chest for the last hour evaporated into thin air. The tears that had been threatening to fall completely dried up. A cold, absolute stillness washed over my entire body. I looked down at Maya's innocent, peaceful, sleeping face. She deserved a strong father. But she did not deserve a thief. She did not deserve to be born into a family of arrogant, narcissistic parasites who would gladly steal her future just to buy a temporary illusion of grandeur. The sadness in my eyes hardened into ice-cold, unbreakable rage. I did not just want my stolen money back. I wanted to tear down the entire fake reality he had built. I wanted to expose his frauds. I wanted to strip him, his snobby mother, and his greedy sisters of every single ounce of their unearned pride. I wanted to watch them lose everything they valued in front of the exact same audience they were currently bragging to. I reached up and pulled the yellow transit cord to request the next stop. I was not going back to our cramped apartment to cry. I was going to war. My name is Nia. I reached deep into the hidden waterproof lining of my hospital overnight bag. My fingers bypassed the cheap cotton nursing bras and the complimentary hospital mesh underwear until they brushed against cold, heavy metal. I pulled it out. It was a sleek, matte black satellite phone secured with military-grade encryption. DeAndre had never seen this device. He thought my whole life existed on the cracked, outdated smartphone I used to clip digital coupons. He thought my entire net worth was tied to that pathetic $15,000 joint account he had just drained. I held my thumb against the biometric scanner. The screen glowed to life, displaying a single contact icon. I tapped it and held the device to my ear, resting my other hand protectively over Maya's small back. The line rang exactly once before a sharp, authoritative voice answered. "Report," the voice demanded. "Uncle Ray," I said, my voice cutting through the rumble of the bus engine. "It is Nia." The rigid professionalism on the other end instantly melted into warm, frantic relief. "Nia. Lord have mercy, child. We got the notification from the hospital that you were admitted for an emergency procedure 2 days ago. I have had a team on standby waiting for your signal. Are you all right? Is the baby safe?" "Maya is perfectly fine," I answered, looking down at her sleeping face. "She is beautiful, Uncle Ray, but I am not calling for a wellness check. I am calling to end the hibernation protocol." There was a heavy, pregnant silence on the other end of the line. When Uncle Ray finally spoke, his voice had shifted back to the razor-sharp tone of the wealth manager who oversaw the Vanguard Holdings empire. "The protocol was supposed to last 5 years, Nia. You wanted to make sure DeAndre was a self-made man. You wanted to ensure he loved you without the shadow of your family's billions hanging over his head. You have been playing the role of a struggling accountant for 2 years. What happened? What happened is that my husband just proved he is a parasite." I said, my grip tightening on the encrypted phone. "I am sitting on a public transit bus right now, bleeding from a surgical incision holding his newborn daughter. He refused to pick me up because he said he was closing a $5 million deal. Meanwhile, he just drained my entire personal savings account to buy his sister a Hermes bag and lease a Mercedes Maybach to flex for an Instagram livestream." Uncle Ray let out a sharp, disgusted breath. "I told your father before he passed that this boy was nothing but a cheap hustler in a tailored suit. Do you want me to send a security team to your location right now? We can have a private helicopter pick you up." "No," I replied coldly. "I do not want to be rescued. I want to go on the offensive. Uncle Ray, tell me the exact status of DeAndre's corporate loan application with Vanguard Holdings." I heard the rapid clacking of a high-speed mechanical keyboard as Uncle Ray pulled up the files. DeAndre submitted the final paperwork for a $5 million line of credit through his company Apex Lifestyle Management. He has been hounding our commercial division for weeks. The executives were prepared to deny it because his business model is entirely smoke and mirrors. He has zero liquid assets and massive liabilities. But per your strict instructions, we kept the application pending so you could evaluate his character. "Evaluate his character," I repeated, a bitter smile twisting my lips. "Evaluation complete. He failed. Uncle Ray, I need you to execute a full immediate asset unfreeze on all my private accounts. I want my name reinstated as the active chairwoman of Vanguard Holdings across all internal banking systems." "Consider it done," Uncle Ray said without hesitation. "The Vanguard portfolio is completely at your disposal. What do you want us to do about DeAndre's application?" "I want you to approve it," I said. Uncle Ray paused. "Excuse me, you want to give him the $5 million? "No," I clarified, my voice dripping with venom. "I want you to officially approve the credit line in the Vanguard system so he gets the automated notification of approval. Let his ego inflate to its absolute maximum capacity. Let him think he actually secured the funding. Then I want you to immediately flag the account for fraudulent collateral." Lock the funds, freeze every single corporate credit card attached to his name, and initiate an immediate repossession order on any assets he leased using our pending approval as proof of income. That includes the matte black Maybach he just picked up. A low, dark chuckle echoed through the phone. It will be a bloodbath, Nia. When our system freezes those cards, any transaction he attempts will trigger a hard decline. That is exactly what I am counting on, I said. He is currently hosting a celebration dinner in the VIP room of Le Bijou. He is racking up a massive bill to impress his mother and sisters. I want that corporate card to turn into a useless piece of plastic right when the waiter hands him the check. It will be processed in 60 seconds, Uncle Ray confirmed. Nia Le Bijou is a commercial tenant of ours. We own the entire building. Do you want me to call the general manager and inform him that the landlord is en route? Yes, I said, staring out the window as the scenery began to change. Tell the manager I am coming, and tell him to follow my lead no matter how I look when I walk through the door. Understood, Madam Chairman, Uncle Ray said respectfully. Welcome back. The line clicked dead. I slipped the encrypted phone back into the hidden compartment of my bag. I felt a strange vibrating energy rushing through my veins, completely overriding the physical pain of my recent surgery. For 2 years, I had shrunk myself to fit into DeAndre's world. I had worn cheap clothes, cooked budget meals, and smiled politely while his mother Vivian mocked my lack of pedigree. I had let his sister Jada look down her surgically enhanced nose at my career. I had done it all in the desperate hope of building a genuine, authentic family rooted in love, not money. But they did not value love. They only valued leverage. And they were about to find out that they had just tried to leverage the most powerful woman in the state of Georgia. The bus slowly rumbled out of the rundown industrial district and crossed the invisible dividing line into Buckhead, the epicenter of wealth and luxury in Atlanta. The cracked sidewalks and boarded-up storefronts gave way to pristine tree-lined avenues, towering glass skyscrapers, and high-end designer boutiques. Luxury vehicles purred alongside the sputtering city bus. I reached up and yanked the yellow transit cord. The automated voice announced the next stop, located right in the heart of the luxury dining district. The bus hissed to a halt at the curb. I gathered my heavy hospital bag, secured Maya tightly against my chest, and carefully navigated the steep steps down to the pavement. The afternoon air was crisp and biting, but I did not feel the cold anymore. I stood on the sidewalk and looked directly across the street. There it was, Le Bijou. The restaurant was a stunning architectural masterpiece of imported white marble gold accents and massive arched windows. A fleet of exotic cars was parked aggressively around the velvet-roped entrance. Right at the very front of the VIP parking zone sat DeAndre's brand-new matte black Mercedes Maybach gleaming arrogantly in the sunlight. I crossed the street, my cheap hospital-issued grip socks squeaking slightly inside my worn-out sneakers. As I approached the entrance, the valets in their crisp, tailored uniforms stopped what they were doing and stared at me. I looked like a disaster. My hair was tied in a messy, unwashed bun. My oversized gray sweatpants were stained. My face was pale and exhausted. I looked exactly like a homeless woman wandering into a place she desperately did not belong. One of the valets stepped forward, holding up a white-gloved hand to block my path. "Excuse me, miss," he said gently but firmly. "The bus stop is across the street. This area is for patrons of Le Bijou only." I ignored him completely, stepping around his outstretched arm and walking straight past the heavy velvet ropes. I pushed through the massive glass and brass revolving doors, stepping into the warm, intensely perfumed air of the main lobby. The interior was breathtaking. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings. Wealthy patrons in designer clothing sat in plush velvet booths sipping $100 cocktails. The soft, elegant notes of a live jazz quartet drifted through the room. And right in the center of the foyer stood the hostess stand. The hostess was a tall, strikingly beautiful woman wearing a fitted black designer dress. When she saw me walk in, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up in absolute horror. She slammed her reservation book shut and practically ran out from behind her podium to intercept me before I could take another step into the dining room. "Ma'am, stop right there," She ordered, her voice sharp and loud enough to draw the attention of several nearby tables. "You cannot be in here. We have a strict formal dress code, and we absolutely do not allow outside bags or infants in the main dining area. I need you to leave the premises immediately before I call security." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply fixed her with a stare so cold and unwavering that she physically took a half-step backward. I tightened my grip on my sleeping daughter, squared my shoulders, and looked past the hostess, scanning the corridor that led to the private dining rooms. "Move out of my way," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I am not here to eat your food. I am here to collect a debt." Without waiting for her to respond, I stepped around her frozen figure. I heard her frantically calling for security over her earpiece, but I did not care. I walked directly down the marble hallway, the heavy hospital bag thumping against my hip with every step. The faint sound of Keisha's obnoxious laughter echoed from behind a set of heavy gold-leafed double doors at the very end of the hall, the VIP room. I stood before the grand entrance, taking one final deep breath. The naive, accommodating wife who had stepped onto that city bus was officially dead. The billionaire who owned the ground they were standing on had arrived. I placed my hand on the brass handles, and with a single forceful push, I threw the doors wide open. The heavy oak doors hit the wall with a loud, reverberating thud that echoed through the private space. The smooth jazz music playing from the corner speakers seemed to instantly cut off. The raucous laughter that had filled the room died in the back of Keisha's throat. 5 pairs of eyes snapped toward the entrance, expecting to see a waiter carrying another bottle of expensive champagne. Instead, they saw me standing there in my cheap, worn-out hospital clothes. I stood in the doorway, a ghost of the woman they thought they knew. The stark contrast between the opulent, gold-leafed private dining room and my unwashed, exhausted appearance was incredibly jarring. The room smelled of truffle oil, expensive cologne, and fresh lilies. I smelled of sterile hospital alcohol, public transit, and dried sweat. For a split second, absolute silence reigned. Vivian froze with a crystal flute pressed against her lips, her eyes widening in sheer horror. Jada dropped her silver fork onto her porcelain plate, the loud clink completely shattering the quiet atmosphere of the luxurious room. Keisha frantically fumbled with her phone, hastily ending her live stream before her thousands of followers could see the unglamorous reality of her brother's wife crashing their luxury party. "What in the world is she doing here?" Vivian hissed, finally lowering her glass. She looked at me as if I were a diseased stray dog that had just wandered in from the alleyway. "DeAndre, did you tell her to come here? Look at her. She looks completely deranged. Why on earth would you bring the baby into a high-class establishment like this when she belongs at home in bed?" I stepped further into the room, letting the heavy doors close shut behind me with a soft click. "I am your son's wife, Vivian," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I just gave birth to your granddaughter 48 hours ago. Or did you conveniently forget that tiny detail while you were busy picking out your imported caviar and sipping your expensive champagne? You are sitting here, celebrating with the money meant for your grandchild." Jada let out a loud theatrical scoff, waving her manicured hand in front of her face, as if I were carrying a plague. "Oh, please, Nia, stop playing the victim," Jada complained loudly. "We are trying to celebrate a massive business milestone here. DeAndre is stepping into a whole new tax bracket today, and you decide to waltz in looking like you just crawled out of a public dumpster. You are bringing the entire vibe down for all of us. And frankly, you smell like a hospital waiting room. It is making me lose my appetite." "You always do this, Nia. You always try to make everything about your own little struggles instead of supporting your husband when he achieves something monumental." Trey chuckled, leaning back in his velvet chair and taking a slow sip of his amber drink. "You really could not have put on some decent clothes, Nia. You are embarrassing my brother in front of the entire restaurant staff. This is Le Bijou, not a local fast food joint in the suburbs. Have some respect for the aesthetic we are trying to maintain here." I looked directly at Trey, then at Jada, and finally at Vivian. Every single one of them was draped in designer clothing, flaunting flashy jewelry they could not afford playing pretend on my dime. They were completely devoid of empathy, entirely consumed by their pathetic obsession with status and appearance. DeAndre finally snapped out of his state of shock. His face flushed a dark, angry red. He slammed his white linen napkin onto the table and marched aggressively over to me. His eyes were wide with a manic, furious energy that I had never seen before. Before I could say another word, he grabbed my upper arm. His grip was entirely too tight, his large fingers aggressively digging into my skin through the thin fabric of my oversized gray hospital maternity jacket. He yanked me roughly toward the far corner of the room away from the table. The sudden violent motion pulled directly at my surgical incision, sending a sharp, blinding wave of white-hot pain straight through my abdomen. I bit down on my tongue so hard I tasted blood, but I refused to wince or cry out. I held Maya tighter against my chest to protect her from his erratic movements and glared up at him. "What is wrong with you, DeAndre?" hissed his voice, dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper, so his beloved family would not hear anything. "Are you actually insane right now? What are you doing here ruining my night? I told you to take the bus home and wait for me." I did take the bus. I replied, my voice completely deadpan and devoid of any affection. But it dropped me off right outside this restaurant. Funny how public transit works sometimes. He shook my arm aggressively, his eyes darting frantically toward the heavy oak doors to make sure no staff members were watching this altercation. "You are ruining absolutely everything I have worked for. Do you have any idea how important this is? I am entertaining my family tonight. I am projecting massive success to the world, and you show up looking like a homeless beggar holding a baby. You are humiliating me, Nia. You are ruining my meticulously crafted image." "Your image," I repeated, a cold, bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Your image is a complete hallucination, DeAndre. You drained my personal savings account. You stole $15,000 from your newborn daughter to buy a ridiculous handbag for your sister and rent a luxury car you absolutely cannot afford. You are not a mogul, DeAndre. You are a common thief." DeAndre's eyes flashed with genuine panic for a brief second, but he quickly masked it with pure defensive aggression. "Keep your voice down right now," he spat. "I did not steal anything from you. I borrowed those funds for a short-term investment to secure my future. When the Vanguard Holdings funding clears my accounts tomorrow, I will put it right back into your little savings account. You simply do not understand how high-level business works. Now turn around, walk out that door, and go sit in the main lobby, out of sight, right this very second. Do not speak to anyone on the staff. Do not look at any of the other wealthy patrons. Just sit there quietly on the bench like a good supportive wife until I am done paying the bill and celebrating with my family. Then we will talk about your disrespectful behavior when we get back to the apartment." I stared up at the man I had married. The man I had cooked cheap meals for, cleaned up after, and downgraded my entire life for. He was looking at me not as an equal partner, not as a loving wife. He was looking at me as an embarrassing liability he needed to hide in a dark corner so he could continue his pathetic masquerade. He thought he could command me like a disobedient child. "I am not going anywhere," I said softly, my voice carrying the weight of a billion-dollar empire he knew nothing about. I violently jerked my arm out of his abusive grasp. The sudden, forceful movement caught him completely off guard. He stumbled back half a step, his expensive velvet suit jacket bunching up awkwardly around his shoulders. I did not give him a chance. I did not give him a single second to recover his arrogant composure. I turned my back on him, completely dismissing his authority, and walked directly toward the center of the room. Vivian and Jada watched in stunned, absolute silence as I approached the massive mahogany dining table. There was one empty chair located at the very head of the table, directly opposite where DeAndre had been sitting and holding court. It was the chair reserved for the guest of honor, the seat that commanded the entire room. I reached out and pulled the heavy wooden chair backward confidently. The thick legs scraped loudly against the polished marble floor, echoing through the room. I sat down, deliberately adjusting Maya in my lap so she could rest peacefully despite the toxic environment. I looked around the table, making direct, unwavering eye contact with every single parasite sitting there. "I am exactly where I belong," I announced clearly. Vivian slammed her hand onto the table, rattling the expensive silverware. "DeAndre," she shrieked, "get this ungrateful woman out right now!" DeAndre charged forward, reaching out to physically drag me away, but before his hands could touch me, the heavy doors swung open. The restaurant general manager stepped inside, carrying a polished silver platter. His name tag read, Julian. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored tuxedo and moved with the silent grace of someone accustomed to handling high-profile clientele. The sudden intrusion forced DeAndre to freeze in his tracks. He quickly dropped his hands to his sides, smoothing out his velvet jacket and pasting that fake charismatic smile back onto his face. Julian walked directly to the head of the table, completely ignoring the heavy tension suffocating the room. He did not look at me sitting in the guest of honor chair. Instead, he turned his attention to DeAndre, presenting the silver platter with a crisp white receipt resting on top. "I hope the celebration was to your standard," Sir Julian said, his voice perfectly polite. "Whenever you are ready." DeAndre let out a loud, arrogant laugh that sounded entirely forced. He shot me a venomous glare before turning back to his family, spreading his arms wide. "Well, family, I suppose it is time to pay the piper," he announced loudly, ensuring everyone in the room was focused on him. "Let us see how much damage we did tonight." He picked up the receipt and let out a low whistle, shaking his head in mock disbelief. $18,000. He chuckled, waving the slip of paper in the air. A drop in the bucket for Apex Lifestyle Management, but definitely a solid dinner. Vivian gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. $18,000, DeAndre. She breathed, her eyes wide with greedy admiration. "Oh my goodness, you really did spoil us tonight. I have never seen a bill that high in my entire life. You are truly walking in your season of financial blessing." Jada leaned over to look at the receipt, her eyes scanning the itemized list with blatant greed. "That is what happens when you order 4 bottles of the vintage Dom Perignon imported beluga caviar and the gold leaf Wagyu steaks," she said, sounding incredibly smug. "You cannot put a price tag on luxury, Vivian. This is just the new normal for our family." DeAndre smirked, reaching into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a sleek, heavy metal credit card. It was a matte black corporate card, the kind that screamed unlimited spending power to anyone who did not know better. He tossed it onto the silver platter with a loud metallic clink. "Put it on the company tab," Julian DeAndre said, waving his hand dismissively. "And go ahead and add a straight 20% gratuity for your team. You guys did a fantastic job keeping the champagne flowing all night." Julian bowed his head slightly and picked up the platter. "Right away, sir," he said, turning on his heel and walking over to the discreet payment terminal located on the mahogany sideboard near the door. The room fell into an awkward silence. DeAndre stood near the head of the table, glaring down at me. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "See that, Nia," he sneered. $18,000 without batting an eye. That is the level I am operating on. When we get home, you are going to pack your bags and go stay with whatever distant relatives you have left. I am not letting your poverty mindset drag my empire down anymore." I did not respond. I simply reached across the table, picked up a crystal glass filled with sparkling water, and took a slow, deliberate sip. A sharp electronic beep echoed from the payment terminal. Julian stood at the sideboard, staring at the small digital screen. He frowned slightly, pressing a few buttons. Another sharp beep rang out. Julian picked up the heavy metal card and walked back to the table, his professional demeanor completely unchanged, but his eyes betraying a hint of discomfort. "I am incredibly sorry," Sir Julian said, holding the card out to DeAndre. "It appears this card has been declined." The smug smile vanished from DeAndre's face instantly. He snatched the card from Julian's hand, his face flushing a deep shade of crimson. "Declined," he repeated, his voice rising in volume. "That is completely impossible. There is a $5 million line of credit attached to that account. Your machine must be broken. Run it again right now." "I have already attempted the transaction twice," Sir Julian replied calmly. "The terminal is communicating perfectly with the merchant bank. The issuer has placed a hard freeze on the account." DeAndre cursed under his breath, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled his designer wallet back out. "Fine," he snapped. Fraud protection probably flagged it because it is an unusually high dinner bill. It happens all the time to high net worth individuals when they spend big. He pulled out a second credit card, a gold business platinum card, and shoved it into Julian's hand. Try this one. It is tied to my secondary operating account. Julian took the card and walked back to the terminal. The silence in the room was no longer awkward. It was suffocating. Vivian shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her feathered fascinator trembling slightly as she looked around the room. Jada pulled her new Hermes bag closer to her chest, her eyes darting nervously between DeAndre and the waiter. Trey cleared his throat, taking a slow sip of his water, looking suddenly very interested in the table linens. Keisha stopped adjusting her hair and stared blankly at her brother. Beep! The sound cut through the room like a physical blow. Julian returned holding the gold card. I apologize, sir, he said, his tone growing slightly more rigid. This card has also been declined. The issuer indicates the account has been entirely suspended. What are you talking about? DeAndre yelled, slamming his hand onto the table so hard the silverware rattled against the plates. Suspended. That is a lie. You are trying to embarrass me in front of my family. I am a VIP client. Do you know who I am? You run that card again, or I swear I will have your job by tomorrow morning. Sir, please lower your voice, Julian said, maintaining his professional composure despite the threat. I assure you the issue is not with our equipment. I am simply relaying the message directly from your financial institution. DeAndre was sweating now. Tiny beads of moisture gathered on his forehead, shining under the crystal chandelier. He frantically dug into his wallet, pulling out a third card, a standard personal credit card. Run this one, he demanded, his voice cracking slightly, betraying his mounting panic. Just run it. Julian took the third card and processed it. A third and final beep echoed through the room, sealing his fate. Declined, Julian said, setting the card back on the silver platter and pushing it toward DeAndre. All three of your accounts are locked, sir. If you are unable to provide a valid form of payment immediately, I will be forced to involve restaurant security and contact the local authorities regarding a theft of services. Vivian gasped out loud, clutching her chest as if she were having an actual heart attack. DeAndre, what is happening? She cried, her voice thick with genuine terror. Why are your cards not working? We cannot go to jail over a dinner bill. I am a respected member of the church community. Jada looked completely horrified, all her previous arrogance vanishing into thin air. DeAndre, you told us the business was booming, she snapped, her sharp tone turning accusing. You told us you just secured massive funding. Why are your accounts suspended? Do you actually have the money to pay for this, or did you just drag us into a massive scam? DeAndre looked like a trapped animal. He stared at the useless plastic cards on the silver platter, breathing heavily, completely unable to comprehend how his perfectly constructed reality was collapsing around him in a matter of seconds. He looked up at Julian, his eyes wide with desperate rage. This is a mistake, he stammered, wiping the sweat from his brow. My company is backed by Vanguard Holdings. They just approved my commercial funding today. There is no way my accounts are frozen. There has to be a glitch in the banking system. I set my crystal glass of sparkling water down on the table. The soft clink of the glass against the marble drew every single eye in the room directly to me. I leaned back comfortably in the guest of honor chair, resting my hands protectively over Maya. They are not making a mistake, DeAndre, I said, my voice slicing through the panicked chaos like a sharpened blade. Your corporate accounts are frozen because Vanguard Holdings just completely pulled your $5 million line of credit. The entire room went dead silent. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. DeAndre stared at me, his jaw practically hitting the floor, his eyes bulging out of his head. Vivian and Jada looked at me as if I had just grown a second head. Keisha slowly lowered her hands, her mouth hanging open in pure shock. DeAndre swallowed hard, his voice trembling. What did you just say? He whispered. I smiled, a cold, ruthless smile that did not reach my eyes. I said your funding is gone, I repeated, enunciating every single word so the reality would sink deep into his bones. The executives at Vanguard flagged your application for fraudulent collateral. They locked your funds, suspended your business accounts, and initiated a full recall on any assets you leased using their pending approval as proof of income. You are entirely bankrupt, DeAndre. Trey stood up from his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Wait a minute, Trey said, pointing a shaking finger at me, his face twisted in utter confusion. How in the world do you know that, Nia? You are just a freelance accountant working from a cramped apartment. How could you possibly know the internal banking decisions of a private billion-dollar investment firm? I looked slowly around the room, taking in the sheer terror and confusion painted on their faces. The facade was completely shattered. The glorious moment of absolute destruction had finally arrived, and I was going to savor every single second of it. I did not answer Trey immediately. I let the heavy silence stretch out, forcing them to sit in their agonizing uncertainty. I watched DeAndre pale, his confident swagger replaced by the trembling posture of a broken man. He was realizing that the woman he had abused, neglected, and stolen from was holding a weapon he could not even begin to comprehend. The power dynamic in the room had violently shifted, and they were all entirely at my mercy. I adjusted my posture, making sure Maya was perfectly secure. DeAndre stared at me, his chest heaving. His mind was desperately trying to connect the dots, but his arrogant brain simply could not process the truth. He took a step toward me, his hands balled into tight fists. "Who have you been talking to?" "Nia," he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous guttural growl. "Did you hack into my email? Did you call my loan officer and lie to them? Tell me right now how you know about my Vanguard application. You really think I need to hack an email to know you are a fraud?" "DeAndre," I replied calmly, "you built your entire life on lies, and you thought you could fund it by stealing from your own child. But you made one fatal miscalculation." "What miscalculation?" Jada demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. "What are you talking about, Nia? Answer Trey's question. How do you know about Vanguard Holdings?" I looked directly into DeAndre's terrified eyes. "Because Vanguard Holdings is not just some faceless investment firm," I said quietly, the weight of the truth finally dropping into the room. "Vanguard Holdings belongs to my family." The absolute absurdity of my statement hung in the air like a thick, suffocating cloud. "Vanguard Holdings belongs to my family." The words echoed in the silence, bouncing off the gold-leafed walls of the VIP room. DeAndre stared at me for a long, agonizing moment before he let out a loud, barking laugh. It was a desperate, unhinged sound that completely lacked his usual polished charm. He looked at Trey and Jada, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Are you listening to this lunatic?" DeAndre asked, his voice cracking slightly. "She has completely lost her mind. The stress of the surgery must have triggered some kind of postpartum psychosis. She is a freelance accountant who clips grocery coupons and drives a 10-year-old sedan. Now she thinks she owns the largest private investment firm in the South. This is pathetic, Nia. You are embarrassing yourself in front of my family." Vivian let out a long, dramatic sigh of relief, fanning her face with her linen napkin. "Oh, thank heavens," Vivian breathed, pressing a hand to her chest. "For a second there, you actually had me worried, DeAndre." She sounded so convincing. "But you are right, she is clearly suffering from some kind of mental breakdown. We need to get her to a psychiatric ward immediately before she ruins your business reputation with these ridiculous delusions." Jada rolled her eyes, picking up her crystal glass again. "Seriously. Nia, you need professional help," Jada sneered. "You cannot just invent a fantasy world where you are a secret billionaire just because you are jealous of DeAndre's success. It is honestly incredibly sad to watch you unravel like this." I did not break eye contact with DeAndre. I did not blink. I just sat there perfectly composed, with Maya resting gently against my chest. "If I am delusional, DeAndre, why are your credit cards sitting on that silver platter completely useless?" I asked, my voice perfectly level. "Why did the terminal reject every single account tied to your name? Call them. Pull out your phone right now and call your contact at the commercial lending division. Prove to your mother and your sisters that I am just a crazy woman having a breakdown. Prove to them that you still have $5 million waiting for you." DeAndre's jaw clenched so tight the muscles in his cheeks twitched. He wanted to dismiss me. He wanted to order me out of the room, but the reality of those 3 declined credit cards was sitting right there on the table. He reached into his velvet jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers were trembling so violently, he almost dropped the expensive device onto the marble floor. "Fine," he spat, unlocking the screen with frantic, aggressive swipes. "I will call Marcus Sterling. He is the Senior Vice President of Commercial Lending at Vanguard. We play golf together. He personally assured me the funds were secured. I am going to put him on speakerphone right now so this entire room can hear him confirm my credit line. And when he does, you are packing your bags tonight, Nia." DeAndre tapped the screen and slammed the phone down onto the center of the mahogany table. He pressed the speaker icon. The loud, rhythmic ringing tone filled the tense silence of the private dining room. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. With every second that passed, DeAndre's confident posture seemed to shrink just a fraction more. Vivian leaned forward in her chair, holding her breath. Keisha had completely abandoned her phone, staring wide-eyed at the device on the table. On the 4th ring, the line clicked open. A crisp, professional voice echoed from the speaker. "This is Marcus Sterling." "Marcus, my man," DeAndre practically shouted, forcing a hearty, overly familiar tone into his voice. "It is DeAndre from Apex Lifestyle Management. Listen, I am sitting here at Le Bijou with my family celebrating our new partnership, and I just had the craziest thing happen. My corporate cards all got declined at the table. Your fraud department must have put a security hold on my accounts because of the high transaction volume. Could you go into the system and clear that up for me right now so I can take care of this bill?" There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. When Marcus Sterling finally spoke, his voice was completely devoid of the friendly golf buddy warmth DeAndre was desperately trying to project. The tone was ice cold and rigidly formal. "Mr. DeAndre, I am not authorized to clear any security holds on your accounts," Marcus said. "Your accounts were not flagged by the automated fraud department. They were manually suspended." DeAndre's fake smile faltered. His eyes darted nervously toward me, then back to the phone. "Suspended," he repeated, trying to keep his voice steady. "What do you mean, suspended? We just finalized the paperwork for the $5 million credit line this morning. You said everything was good to go. The application was conditionally approved pending a final collateral review." Marcus explained, his voice sharp and utterly dismissive. "Upon that final review, our internal audit team discovered massive discrepancies in your financial disclosures. You utilized unverified assets as collateral and attempted to leverage our pending approval letter to secure luxury vehicle leases through third-party vendors. That constitutes fraudulent financial behavior, Mr. DeAndre." The color completely drained from DeAndre's face. Vivian gasped loudly, covering her mouth with both hands. Trey sat up straight, his eyes wide with sudden realization that his brother was not a successful businessman at all. "That is a misunderstanding," DeAndre stammered, desperately leaning closer to the phone. "That is just creative accounting, Marcus. We can fix the paperwork. You know my business model is solid. We have investors lining up. Just unlock the operating accounts so I can pay for this dinner, and we will sort out the audit tomorrow morning." "There will be no sorting this out tomorrow," Marcus replied coldly. "Vanguard Holdings has completely severed all ties with Apex Lifestyle Management. Your line of credit has been permanently revoked. We have already notified the commercial vehicle dealerships about your fraudulent lease agreements. You have 0 active accounts with our institution." DeAndre slammed his fist onto the table. "You cannot do this to me," he screamed, losing all remaining shreds of his composure. "You are just a vice president, Marcus. I know the CEO. I will call the executive board. You do not have the authority to pull a $5 million deal without upper management approval." "You are absolutely right, Mr. DeAndre," Marcus said, his voice remaining irritatingly calm. "I do not have the authority to unilaterally terminate a contract of that magnitude. I did not make this decision. The directive came from the very top." "What are you talking about?" DeAndre demanded, his voice cracking with panic. "Who canceled my funding? Give me their name right now. I demand to speak to whoever authorized this termination." A long, heavy silence stretched across the phone line. The quiet in the room was so absolute, I could hear the soft, rhythmic breathing of my daughter resting against my chest. I gently stroked her back, waiting for the inevitable impact. The termination order was issued exactly 20 minutes ago, Marcus finally said. It was an absolute executive override executed directly by the chairwoman of Vanguard Holdings. DeAndre froze. His mind raced frantically. Chairwoman. He repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Vanguard does not have a chairwoman. The CEO is Raymond Washington. I have done my research on your corporate structure. There is no woman running that company. Who the hell is the chairwoman? There was another brief pause. I believe you already know her, Mr. DeAndre, Marcus said. In fact, according to the location tracker on the executive security protocol, she is currently sitting right in front of you. The line went dead. The dial tone hummed loudly from the phone on the table, echoing through the massive private dining room. DeAndre stared at the glowing screen, his brain completely short-circuiting. He slowly raised his head. His eyes met mine. The sheer unadulterated terror radiating from his face was absolute perfection. He looked at my messy hair. He looked at my cheap, oversized hospital jacket. He looked at the woman he had treated like a subservient burden for 2 entire years. The woman he had ordered to take a public bus home in the freezing rain. The woman whose bank account he had just drained to fund his pathetic illusion of wealth. DeAndre breathed the word, catching in his throat. No, that is impossible. You are Nia. You are just an accountant. You do not have any family. You told me you grew up in the foster system. I told you what you needed to hear, DeAndre. I said, my voice perfectly calm and unwavering. I told you I was an orphan because I wanted to see how you treated someone who had absolutely no leverage, no money, and no power. I wanted to see the real you. And today you finally showed me. You are a man who would steal from his own newborn daughter to buy a handbag for a sister who does not even respect him. Jada pushed her chair back violently, scrambling away from the table as if the Hermes bag suddenly burned her hands. Vivian looked like she was about to faint, her chest heaving as she stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. Keisha had her hands pressed against her cheeks, her mouth open in a silent scream. You lied to me, DeAndre whispered, stepping backward away from the table. You set me up. You planned this entire thing to humiliate me. I did not set you up, DeAndre, I replied, adjusting Maya gently in my arms. I simply gave you enough rope to hang yourself. And you tied the noose perfectly all by yourself. You wanted to play the role of a high-rolling billionaire. You wanted to act like you owned the city. But you own absolutely nothing. You do not even own the velvet suit you are wearing right now. Before DeAndre could utter another word of protest, the heavy oak double doors swung open once again. Julian, the general manager, stepped back into the room. This time he was not carrying a silver platter. He was accompanied by 2 massive security guards dressed in immaculate black suits. DeAndre immediately pointed at Julian. Get her out of here, DeAndre yelled desperately, trying to reclaim some shred of authority. She is trespassing. Call the police and have her arrested right now. Julian did not even look at DeAndre. He completely ignored the screaming man in the velvet suit. Instead, the general manager walked directly toward the head of the table where I was sitting. He stopped 2 feet away from my chair, clasped his hands in front of him, and bowed deeply, bending perfectly at the waist in a massive show of total respect. Madam Chairwoman, Julian said, his voice projecting clearly across the silent room. Please accept my deepest apologies for the earlier confusion at the front desk. The hostess has been severely reprimanded for failing to recognize you. I nodded slowly, acknowledging his apology. It is quite all right, Julian, I said softly. I am not dressed in my usual business attire today. I appreciate you handling the situation promptly. Of course, ma'am, Julian said, standing up straight. I was instructed by Mr. Washington's office to inform you that the building perimeter has been secured by your private security detail. Your vehicle is waiting at the front entrance whenever you are ready to depart. DeAndre staggered backward, bumping into the marble sideboard. He looked at Julian, then at the security guards, and finally back at me. His entire world was collapsing in real time. Building perimeter. DeAndre stammered. What vehicle? Julian, what are you talking about? She is my wife. She does not have a private security detail. Julian finally turned his head to look at DeAndre. His expression was completely devoid of the polite customer service warmth he had displayed earlier. It was the look a man gives to a completely irrelevant pest. "I suggest you lower your voice," Sir Julian said sharply. "You are currently speaking to the absolute owner of this establishment." Vanguard Holdings purchased the Labijou Property Group 3 years ago. Madam Chairwoman is my direct employer, and she is the sole landlord of this entire luxury building. You are currently standing on her private property, and as of 5 minutes ago, your corporate accounts have completely failed to clear the balance for your expensive meal. You are officially trespassing. The word trespassing hung in the air like a death sentence. DeAndre opened his mouth to argue, but before any sound could escape his throat, a young valet dressed in the crisp restaurant uniform pushed past the security guards and burst into the room. He looked absolutely frantic, completely out of breath as he scanned the faces around the table before his wide eyes landed directly on DeAndre. "Sir," the valet gasped, pointing a shaking finger toward the front of the luxury building. "The matte black Maybach you parked in the VIP zone out front. There is a commercial tow truck out there hooking it up right now. They are taking your car." DeAndre looked as if he had been physically struck with a baseball bat. What he yelled, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate shriek. "Who is taking my car? Call the police right now. Stop them. Tell them I am a VIP guest." The valet shook his head, taking a nervous step backward away from the screaming man. "I tried to stop them, sir, but the tow truck driver showed me the legal paperwork. It is an immediate bank-ordered repossession. They have the legal title, and they are actively pulling your vehicle onto the flatbed as we speak. There is absolutely nothing our staff can do to stop a legal seizure." DeAndre spun around and glared at me, his chest heaving with desperate, frantic breaths. "Did you do this?" he demanded, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You are stealing my car. You are ruining my life." "I am not stealing anything, DeAndre," I replied, my voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of any sympathy. "I am simply reclaiming stolen property. You leased that $400,000 vehicle using Vanguard Holdings' conditional approval letter as your primary proof of income and collateral. When I permanently revoked your business funding 10 minutes ago, the commercial dealership was automatically notified that your financial backing was entirely fraudulent. They dispatched the repo truck immediately to secure their asset. You do not own that Maybach, DeAndre. You never did. You just rented it to take pictures for your sister to post on the internet so you could pretend to be a mogul." Keisha let out a loud, dramatic wail, burying her face in her hands. "This is so embarrassing," she cried, her voice muffled by her acrylic nails. "My followers just saw that car on my live stream. Everyone on my timeline thinks we are incredibly rich and successful. What am I supposed to tell them when they ask where the car went?" "You can tell them you are a pathetic fraud, just like your brother Jada," snapped, turning on Keisha with vicious lightning speed. The facade of unshakable family loyalty was dissolving into thin air right before my very eyes. Jada glared at DeAndre, her face twisted in absolute disgust and fury. "You dragged us all down here to celebrate your fake empire, and now we are sitting in a private dining room with an $18,000 bill we absolutely cannot pay. How are we supposed to leave this restaurant, DeAndre? We do not have a ride, and we do not have a single dollar to our names." Julian stepped forward smoothly, gesturing toward the polished silver platter that still held DeAndre's 3 useless declined credit cards. "That is indeed the most pressing question," Madam Julian said, addressing Jada before turning his sharp, unyielding gaze back to DeAndre. "The balance for the gourmet food, the vintage champagne, and the exclusive room rental remains completely outstanding. If a valid form of payment is not presented within the next 5 minutes, my security team will permanently lock the doors and the local police will be dispatched to arrest everyone sitting at this table for grand theft of services." Vivian shrieked loudly, clutching the edge of the mahogany table as if the floor were falling out from beneath her. Arrested, she gasped, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. "I am the head of the community church choir. I have a pristine reputation in my neighborhood. I cannot go to a federal jail over a dinner bill. DeAndre, do something right now. Call one of your wealthy investor friends. Call anyone who can bail us out of this disaster." I do not have anyone to call. DeAndre admitted, his voice breaking into a pathetic, miserable whimper. His broad shoulders slumped forward, and all the arrogant swagger he had walked into the room with was completely gone. He was nothing but a terrified little boy staring directly down the barrel of his own disastrous consequences. I am broke, Mom. The Apex Company accounts are completely empty. I have nothing left. Trey jumped up from his velvet chair, knocking it backward onto the marble floor with a loud crash. Do not look at me, Trey yelled, holding his hands up defensively and backing away from his brother. I am not going down for this scam. I just came here to eat dinner. I did not order the vintage champagne or the imported caviar. DeAndre ordered all of it. Arrest him. Let the rest of us go home. I watched them turn on each other like a pack of starving wild wolves. It was a beautiful, poetic disaster, unfolding in real time. For 2 entire years, they had looked down on me, treating me like a worthless peasant who was incredibly lucky to even be allowed in their majestic presence. Now they were entirely ready to throw their own blood relatives under the bus just to save their own skin. The loyalty they constantly bragged about was absolutely non-existent. I raised my hand slowly, signaling for Julian to pause his countdown. The room instantly fell completely silent as everyone looked at me, their eyes filled with desperate, pathetic hope. Julian, I said, adjusting Maya slightly as she shifted in her peaceful sleep. I do not want the police swarming my luxury restaurant tonight. It completely ruins the elegant ambiance for the high-paying customers out in the main dining room. I will personally cover the $18,000 deficit from my private Vanguard accounts. Vivian let out a massive, dramatic sigh of relief, pressing her hands together as if she were praying to me. Oh, Nia, thank the Lord. Vivian cried, her voice dripping with sudden, sickening sweetness. I knew you would not let your own family go to jail tonight. You have such a good, beautiful heart. We will pay you back every single penny, I promise you, on my life. I held up a single finger, stopping her mid-sentence. Do not ever call yourself my family again, Vivian. I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy register that sent a visible shiver down her spine. And I am absolutely not doing this as a favor to any of you. I am doing this strictly as a business transaction. Vanguard Holdings does not ever extend unsecured credit to individuals with a documented history of financial fraud. If I am paying this massive bill, I require immediate physical collateral of equal or greater value right here, right now. Collateral, DeAndre echoed, looking around the room frantically, his eyes darting from wall to wall. We do not have anything of value with us, Nia. We just brought ourselves. You have plenty of value currently attached to your bodies, I replied, my eyes slowly scanning the lavish designer outfits and sparkling accessories they had worn specifically to mock my poverty. Julian, please bring a secure bank deposit bag over to the table. Julian snapped his fingers sharply, and one of the massive security guards immediately stepped forward, pulling a thick tamper-proof canvas deposit bag from the inner pocket of his black suit jacket. He unzipped it loudly and held it open, standing directly next to the mahogany table. You want to leave this room without wearing steel handcuffs tonight? I said, leaning forward slightly, so they could hear every single word clearly. Then, you are going to empty your pockets and take off your expensive jewelry. Right now. What? Jada shrieked, clutching her chest in absolute horror. You cannot be serious right now, Nia. I am dead serious, Jada. I snapped, my patience completely evaporating into thin air. You are currently wearing a solid gold Rolex date, just that DeAndre bought you for your birthday last year. Drop it in the canvas bag. Vivian, take off those diamond earrings and that ridiculous imported pearl necklace. Trey, the heavy gold chain goes in the bag too. And Keisha, hand over the diamond Cartier bracelets. They all froze, entirely paralyzed, staring at me in absolute horror. The items I was demanding were their most prized possessions, the very symbols of the fake wealth they use to look down on others in their community. You cannot do this to us, Vivian cried, heavy tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face, ruining her expensive makeup. These are our highly personal items. You are maliciously humiliating us in front of these strangers. You maliciously humiliated yourselves! I shot back, my voice echoing loudly off the gold-leafed walls. You sat here drinking $1,000 champagne paid for with money your son deliberately stole from his own newborn baby. You want to act like high rollers in my city, then pay the damn bill. If the jewelry is not sitting at the bottom of that bag in exactly 60 seconds, Julian will make the call to the police dispatcher. The security guard pulled his phone from his pocket and hovered his thumb over the glowing screen. The threat was incredibly real, and every single person at the table knew it. Slowly, with shaking, defeated hands, Trey reached up to his neck and unclasped his heavy gold chain. He dropped it into the canvas bag with a muffled metallic clink. Vivian was sobbing openly now, her hands trembling so violently she could barely undo the backing of her diamond earrings. She tossed them into the bag, followed quickly by her pearl necklace. Keisha silently slid the expensive bracelets off her wrists, her face bright red with burning shame, and dropped them in without making eye contact. I turned my unrelenting gaze directly to Jada. She was clutching the brand new bright orange Hermes bag tightly to her chest, staring at me with pure, unadulterated venom. That bag too. Jada, I said, pointing a finger directly at the luxury leather item. DeAndre bought it with the $15,000 he stole from my savings account this morning. That bag rightfully belongs to my daughter's future. Put it on the table right now. Jada hesitated, her knuckles turning bright white as she gripped the soft leather. Do it, Jada. DeAndre screamed, his voice cracking with sheer panic. Just give it to her right now. I am not going to federal prison tonight just because you want to keep a purse. With a furious, guttural scream of absolute frustration, Jada slammed the pristine Hermes bag onto the mahogany table. She unclasped her gold Rolex and threw it violently into the canvas bag. There she spat, her eyes filled with hateful, angry tears. Are you happy now, Nia? Are you completely satisfied with ruining our entire night? I looked down at the canvas bag filled with their precious status symbols, and then at the pristine luxury purse sitting on the table. It was never about the money for me. I had billions of dollars sitting safely at my disposal. It was entirely about the principle. It was about violently stripping away the protective armor of arrogance they had worn for years. They were sitting there completely stripped of their fake wealth, looking exactly like what they truly were. Pathetic, desperate frauds without a penny to their names. Julian, take the bag directly to the secure vault. I instructed, my voice calm again. Have the items officially appraised tomorrow morning. If they somehow fall short of the $18,000 balance bill, the remainder directly to DeAndre's home address. Understood, Madam Chairwoman, Julian said, taking the heavy bag from the security guard and bowing respectfully. I stood up from the guest of honor chair, carefully supporting Maya against my chest. My abdominal incision throbbed with a dull, burning ache, but the pure adrenaline rushing through my veins made the physical pain entirely manageable. I looked down at DeAndre one last time. He was sitting slumped low in his chair, his expensive velvet suit looking suddenly ridiculous and entirely out of place. He stared blankly at the floor, completely broken and defeated. I am leaving now, I announced, my voice ringing clear and authoritative in the silent room. My private driver is waiting out front. You all can figure out how to get back to the suburbs on your own. I hear the public bus stop across the street is incredibly reliable this time of night. Vivian looked up at me, her makeup completely smeared and her face a mask of utter despair. Nia, please, Vivian begged, her voice weak and pathetic. How are we supposed to get home? We do not have any money for a taxi. Our phones are dying. Please do not leave us stranded here in the cold. I looked at her without a single ounce of pity in my heart. A few hours ago, your son told me to take the bus home in the freezing rain while I was actively bleeding from surgery. He said it builds character. I suggest you start building yours, Vivian. I turned away from the table and began walking toward the heavy oak doors. The security guards immediately stepped aside, clearing a wide path for me. I paused with my hand on the brass door handle and looked back over my shoulder at the ruined family sitting in the wreckage of their own greed. Do not think this is over, DeAndre, I said, my voice cold and lethal. Tonight was just me collecting the dinner check. Tomorrow we handle the divorce and the corporate fraud. Meet me at the Vanguard Tower penthouse boardroom at exactly 8 in the morning. If you are 1 minute late or if you try to run, my lawyers will hand the wire fraud files directly to the FBI. Have a safe bus ride home. The sun rose over the Atlanta skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across the pristine glass facade of the Vanguard Tower. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse office, looking down at the city waking up far below me. Maya was safely tucked away in the private nursery attached to my executive suite, currently being watched over by my trusted childhood nanny. For the first time in 2 entire years, I was not wearing faded, oversized sweatpants or clipping digital grocery coupons. I was completely transformed. I was draped in a custom-tailored ivory designer suit that fit me with absolute perfection. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, flawless chignon without a single strand out of place. The sheer exhaustion of the previous 2 days had been entirely replaced by a cold, calculating, and ruthless energy. Today was the day I burned DeAndre's fake world to the ground and salted the earth so his toxic family could never grow back. At exactly 10 minutes to 8, the secure intercom on my massive oak desk buzzed loudly. Uncle Ray's voice came through crisp and intensely professional. "Madam Chairwoman, the guests have arrived. The building security team escorted them directly from the freight elevator to the primary boardroom exactly as you requested. They brought outside legal counsel with them." I pressed the silver intercom button. "Keep them waiting in that room for exactly 15 minutes, Ray," I instructed calmly. "Let them sweat in the absolute silence." I tapped a button on my keyboard, and the high-definition security camera feed from the boardroom filled my massive desktop monitor. DeAndre, Vivian, Jada, Keisha, and Trey were huddled anxiously around one end of the massive polished mahogany table. They looked absolutely terrible. Their clothes were heavily wrinkled and stained from their humiliating public bus ride the night before. Vivian's elaborate hair was flat and defeated. Jada looked like she had not slept a single wink, her eyes red and puffy. Keisha was actually holding up her phone, trying to secretly record the opulent surroundings of the billionaire boardroom, but a stern look from the security guard in the corner forced her to quickly put the device away. But standing alongside my pathetic in-laws was a man in a cheap, shiny gray suit, carrying a visibly battered leather briefcase. This was clearly the lawyer DeAndre had managed to scrounge up on such incredibly short notice. Through the crystal-clear audio feed, I could hear DeAndre pacing back and forth across the expensive carpet, his chest puffed out with a newly manufactured sense of supreme arrogance. He had apparently spent the entire night convincing himself that he was not in danger, but rather on the absolute brink of hitting the ultimate financial jackpot. "Listen to me very closely," DeAndre said, pointing a firm finger at his exhausted mother. "Stop crying, Vivian, right now. We are not going to jail. We are going to be richer than we ever possibly imagined. Do you realize what actually happened last night? My wife just admitted in front of a dozen witnesses that she owns a billion-dollar private equity firm. We have been legally married for 2 years. Do you know what that means for us?" The sleazy lawyer chuckled loudly, leaning back against the expensive leather executive chair. "It means you just won the lottery, my friend," the lawyer said, his voice raspy and dripping with unearned arrogance. "The state of Georgia is an equitable distribution state. Assets acquired or appreciated during the exact course of a legal marriage are entirely subject to division. If her massive company grew by even a fraction of a single % while you two were legally married, you are entitled to a massive piece of that pie. She cannot just kick you out on the street. You are her lawful husband. You have undeniable rights to her wealth." Jada perked up suddenly, her posture straightening as pure greed replaced her previous exhaustion. "Are you completely serious right now?" Jada asked, wiping her tired eyes and looking eagerly at the lawyer. "So DeAndre could actually take half of Vanguard Holdings today. We could literally own the building that the French restaurant is located in. We could fire that arrogant manager." "Exactly," DeAndre said, slapping his hand loudly onto the mahogany table. She thought she was being so incredibly smart last night, embarrassing us like that in front of the staff. She thought she was intimidating me, but all she actually did was expose her massive hidden assets to my legal team. I am going to walk out of this building today with hundreds of millions of dollars. I am going to force her to settle immediately, or I will drag her name through the mud in the most public, messy divorce trial this city has ever seen. The press will absolutely eat her alive. A secret billionaire hiding her massive wealth from her struggling, hard-working husband. It is a media goldmine, and she knows it. I watched his pathetic display of unearned confidence for a few more minutes before I reached over and turned off the monitor. It was time to end this ridiculous charade. I walked out of my private office, flanked by Uncle Ray and the three most ruthless, high-powered corporate attorneys in the entire state of Georgia. We walked down the silent, thickly carpeted hallway, our footsteps muffled, and pushed open the heavy double doors of the primary boardroom. The moment I stepped into the room, the entire dynamic completely and violently shifted. DeAndre's sleazy lawyer actually stopped talking mid-sentence and took a physical step backward, visibly intimidated by the sheer imposing presence of my elite legal team. DeAndre stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. I looked absolutely nothing like the tired, accommodating woman he had married and abused. I looked like power incarnate. The ivory suit, the flawless posture, the cold, dead eyes, I was every inch the billionaire chairwoman he had entirely underestimated. I did not say a single word of greeting to any of them. I walked directly to the head of the table, the seat of absolute unquestioned authority, and sat down gracefully. My three lawyers flanked me, standing tall and silent, like modern-day executioners dressed in dark, tailored suits. Uncle Ray stood quietly by the closed double doors, ensuring no one could leave the room without my explicit permission. "Well, well, well," DeAndre sneered quickly, trying to recover his arrogant swagger, though his voice wavered slightly under my intense gaze. "Look who decided to dress up for the occasion today. I have to admit, Nia, you played a very good game. You fooled me for 2 whole years acting like you were struggling. But the game is officially over now. I brought my attorney, Mr. Croft. We are here to talk about my rightful settlement." I leaned back slowly in my high-backed leather chair, crossing my legs and resting my hands perfectly still on the polished wood. "Your settlement," I repeated softly, my voice barely a whisper, but echoing clearly in the massive, silent room. "That is correct, Madam Chairwoman, Mr. Croft," the sleazy lawyer said, trying to sound highly authoritative, but his hands were trembling slightly as he opened his battered briefcase. "My client is your legally wedded husband. He has been functioning as your supportive partner while you actively and maliciously concealed a massive fortune from him. We are fully prepared to file a comprehensive lawsuit demanding 50% of all assets tied to Vanguard Holdings, along with immediate spousal support and full coverage of his legal fees. If you agree to a quiet private settlement right now today, we can completely avoid a very lengthy and public legal battle that would undoubtedly damage your corporate reputation." Vivian nodded vigorously, her confidence suddenly restored by the lawyer's empty threats. She pointed a manicured finger at me across the table. "That is right, Nia," she chimed in, crossing her arms defensively. "You owe my son. He took you in when you had absolutely nothing. He provided a roof over your head. You deceived him. He deserves half of everything you own for the severe emotional distress you caused him and our entire family last night." "You hear that, Nia?" DeAndre said, leaning forward and placing both hands flat on the table, trying desperately to loom over me and assert some kind of physical dominance. "You are not holding the cards anymore. You might have locked my credit cards last night, but today I own half of your entire world. So here is exactly what is going to happen. You are going to reinstate my $5 million commercial credit line immediately. You are going to release my Maybach from the repo lot today. And you are going to write a massive check to my family for the emotional trauma you maliciously inflicted on them. If you do that, I might consider keeping this divorce somewhat civil and out of the daily news cycle." He smiled a wide, predatory smile, completely convinced that he had outsmarted me. He truly believed his marital status was an unbreakable magical shield, protecting him from the consequences of his own disastrous actions. He thought he had successfully backed a billionaire into a tight corner. I looked at his smug, arrogant face. I looked at Vivian's greedy, desperate eyes. I looked at Jada, who was already silently calculating how many designer bags she could buy with DeAndre's upcoming settlement money. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue with their ridiculous legal theories. I did not even bother to defend myself against their pathetic accusations. I simply reached over to the side of my chair, picked up a single thin manila folder, and slid it smoothly across the massive expanse of the mahogany table. It stopped exactly in front of DeAndre. DeAndre stared down at the plain manila folder sitting on the polished wood directly in front of him. He did not touch it immediately. He looked up at me, his brow furrowed in deep suspicion, as if the thin piece of cardboard were physically rigged to explode. "Go ahead, DeAndre," I said, gesturing toward the table with a perfectly manicured hand. "Open it. It is the golden ticket you and your lawyer were just bragging about." Mr. Croft, the sleazy attorney, leaned forward eagerly, his cheap suit rustling in the quiet room. He snatched the folder from the table and flipped it open, expecting to see a multi-million-dollar settlement offer or a desperate plea for a non-disclosure agreement. Instead, his eyes scanned the first page and his entire demeanor completely changed. The arrogant smirk wiped right off his face, replaced instantly by a pale, sickly look of pure professional dread. He quickly flipped to the second page, his eyes darting frantically across the typed paragraphs. He swallowed hard, a large bead of sweat forming on his receding hairline. "What is it?" DeAndre demanded, leaning over to look at the paperwork. "Is it the settlement check? How much is she offering us to keep this quiet?" Mr. Croft did not answer him. He simply closed the folder slowly and pushed it back across the table as if it were a highly venomous snake. "I cannot represent you in this matter," Mr. Croft said, his raspy voice suddenly sounding incredibly small and defeated. "You completely misrepresented your legal standing to me during our phone call this morning." "What are you talking about?" DeAndre snapped, grabbing the folder and ripping it back open. "What is this garbage?" "That garbage, DeAndre," I said, leaning forward slightly, "is the exact document you shoved in my face 2 years ago. Do you remember the week before our wedding? You had just started Apex Lifestyle Management. You managed to secure a tiny $5,000 microloan, and you suddenly thought you were the next great American business mogul. You were so incredibly terrified that I, the poor orphaned freelance accountant, was only marrying you to steal your non-existent fortune." My lead attorney, Mr. Harrison, a tall, impeccably dressed man with silver hair and a voice like a heavy steel door slamming shut, stepped forward. He did not even need to look at a copy of the document. He knew the terms completely by heart. "The document currently resting in your hands is a fully binding prenuptial agreement," Mr. Harrison stated, his deep voice ringing with absolute finality. "It was drafted by your own legal counsel, explicitly requested by you, and signed by my client under the supervision of an independent notary public. Section 4, paragraph B, is particularly relevant to your current delusions. It states, and I quote directly from the text you provided, 'What is mine, and what is yours is yours. There shall be absolutely no equitable division of assets acquired prior to or during the marriage. Furthermore, both parties explicitly waive any and all rights to claim spousal support, alimony, or financial compensation of any kind, regardless of any future increase in net worth or change in financial circumstances.'" The silence in the boardroom was so profound, it felt like all the oxygen had been completely sucked out of the space. Vivian stared at her son, her jaw hanging completely slack. Jada looked like she was going to physically vomit. "You demanded an ironclad predatory contract because your own toxic greed convinced you that I was a gold digger," I continued, my voice slicing through the heavy silence. "You wanted to make absolutely certain that if we ever divorced, I would walk away with absolutely nothing. You dug a massive, inescapable legal trench to protect your pathetic little startup company from my greedy hands. But you were so incredibly blinded by your own narcissism that you never stopped to consider the reverse scenario. That contract works both ways, DeAndre. It protects my generational wealth from you. DeAndre's hands were shaking so violently that the papers rattled loudly against the mahogany table. No, he stammered, his eyes darting frantically across the legal jargon he had once proudly flaunted. No, this cannot be right. This was only meant to protect my business assets. It does not apply to a secret billionaire empire. You hid this from me, Nia. That makes this contract completely void. You committed fraud by omission. Croft, tell her this is legally void. He turned desperately to his cheap lawyer, but Mr. Croft was already clicking his briefcase shut. There is no fraud by omission in a blanket waiver of assets, Mr. Croft said bluntly, completely abandoning his client to save his own professional skin. You demanded a universal separation of property. The language your previous lawyers used is completely airtight. It explicitly covers all known and unknown assets. She owes you absolutely nothing, DeAndre. Not a single penny. I am leaving. I am not wasting my time on a dead case with a client who cannot pay my hourly rate. Mr. Croft turned and practically ran out of the boardroom, the heavy double doors swinging shut behind him. DeAndre sat frozen, staring at the closed doors. The reality of his situation was finally crashing down on him with the crushing weight of a collapsing skyscraper. The magical marital shield he thought he held was entirely worthless. The massive payday he had promised his family just 10 minutes ago was completely gone. He was not going to win a massive settlement. He was not going to force me to reinstate his commercial funding. He was completely and utterly locked out of the Vanguard Holdings empire. Jada exploded first. Are you completely stupid? Jada screamed, lunging forward and slapping DeAndre hard on the shoulder. You made her sign a prenup. You arrogant, pathetic idiot. You literally signed away our only chance to recover from the disaster you caused last night. You promised us millions, DeAndre. You dragged us all the way downtown in yesterday's dirty clothes on a public bus to collect a massive check, and you walk in here with a prenuptial agreement that leaves you completely broke. Vivian buried her face in her hands, sobbing loudly. My house, Vivian wailed, rocking back and forth in her expensive leather executive chair. How are you going to fix this, DeAndre? What are we going to do? We are ruined. The entire church congregation will know we are completely broke. Trey simply stood up disgusted and walked over to the far wall, putting as much physical distance between himself and his brother as possible. You are a joke, Trey muttered, shaking his head. A complete clown. DeAndre looked up at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic kind of pleading. The anger and the arrogance had been entirely stripped away, leaving nothing but a terrified, hollow shell of a man. Nia. Please, DeAndre begged, his voice cracking. You cannot do this to me. I am the father of your child. We just had Maya. You cannot leave me out on the street with absolutely nothing. I will sign the divorce papers today. I will walk away quietly. Just give me a small settlement. Give me enough to pay off my current business debts and keep my apartment. We can end this right now peacefully. Just let me walk away. He thought hitting rock bottom meant walking away with $0. He thought the absolute worst-case scenario was leaving this marriage exactly as broke as he was when he entered it. He still did not understand the sheer magnitude of the storm he had brought upon himself. He thought I was just here to protect my money. He had completely forgotten the $15,000 he stole from his own newborn daughter. I looked at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated ice. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for the man sitting across from me. I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. Immediately, my secondary attorney, a sharp, relentless woman named Ms. Pierce, stepped out from the shadows near the back of the room. She was carrying a massive, heavy white cardboard banker box. She walked directly to the mahogany table and dropped the heavy box right in the center. The loud thud echoed like a judge's gavel slamming down to deliver a final sentence. She pulled the lid off the box, revealing hundreds of thick, neatly organized financial dossiers, bank statements, and heavily highlighted legal contracts. DeAndre stared at the massive box of files, his remaining shred of hope completely evaporating. What is this? He whispered, his eyes wide with renewed terror. I said I would sign the divorce papers, Nia. What more do you possibly want from me? I stood up from my leather chair, buttoning the front of my tailored ivory jacket. I leaned over the mahogany table, resting my hands flat against the polished wood, looking directly down into his terrified, pathetic eyes. "You seem to be operating under a massive delusion, DeAndre," I said, my voice low, smooth, and entirely lethal. "You think we are sitting in a family law dispute. You think this meeting is about negotiating a divorce settlement or figuring out who gets to keep the cheap furniture in our cramped apartment." I paused, letting the cold, hard truth hang in the air for a fraction of a second. "I am not here to talk about a divorce settlement, DeAndre," I continued, locking eyes with him so he could see the absolute destruction waiting for him. "You locked yourself out of my billions with your own greedy prenup. Your civil financial ruin was completely established the second you walked through those doors. Now we are moving on to the criminal phase of this relationship. I brought you here today to talk about federal prison." The words federal prison hung in the air like a physical executioner's blade. DeAndre physically recoiled, falling back into his leather chair as if he had just been shot in the chest. His eyes darted wildly from my face to the massive box of financial documents sitting in the center of the table and then back to my face. "You are bluffing," DeAndre said, his voice barely a raspy whisper, completely stripped of its usual arrogant volume. "You do not have anything on me. I run a legitimate management company. I have never committed a crime in my entire life." I did not even blink. "Ms. Pierce," I said smoothly, keeping my eyes locked dead onto my trembling husband, "please distribute the primary exhibit folders to our distinguished guests. I want everyone at this table to see exactly how legitimate Apex Lifestyle Management truly is." Ms. Pierce stepped forward with the cold, mechanical efficiency of a corporate assassin. She pulled 4 thick red folders from the massive cardboard box and began tossing them onto the polished mahogany table. One landed directly in front of Vivian. One slid over to Jada and Trey. One was placed firmly in front of Keisha. The final, thickest folder was dropped with a loud, heavy thud right in front of DeAndre. "Go ahead and open them," I instructed, my voice echoing cleanly in the massive boardroom. "Look at the foundation of your incredible family wealth." Vivian's hands were shaking so violently she could barely flip the heavy red cardstock cover open. Jada snatched her folder hungrily, still desperately hoping to find some kind of financial loophole that would save her precious boutique. DeAndre stared at his folder, refusing to touch it, completely paralyzed by the overwhelming dread radiating from the documents. "Let us start with you, Vivian," I said, turning my attention to my former mother-in-law. "You have spent the last 2 years constantly bragging about your beautiful 5-bedroom luxury home in the exclusive Buckhead suburbs. You hosted those massive church group dinners, making sure everyone knew your brilliant son bought that house for you because he was such a successful entrepreneur." Vivian looked up from the documents, her eyes wide and confused. "He did buy it for me," Vivian stammered, pointing a trembling finger at DeAndre. "He paid the down payment. He handles the mortgage. He is a good son providing for his mother." "He is a criminal, Vivian," I corrected her, my voice slicing through her pathetic delusions. "Look at page 3 of the mortgage origination packet sitting right in front of you." DeAndre did not have the credit score or the verifiable income to secure a $2 million mortgage. Apex Lifestyle Management was generating absolutely zero revenue. The bank was going to deny the loan application entirely. Vivian's eyes frantically scanned the highlighted text on the page. I watched the exact moment the realization hit her. All the color instantly drained from her perfectly contoured face, leaving her looking gray and entirely hollow. "He used a guarantor." I continued explaining the mechanics of his fraud with surgical precision. "But he did not use his own assets. He used mine. When we were filling out our joint tax returns last year, he secretly copied my social security number, my private banking details, and my personal identification documents. He forged my signature on a massive stack of financial guarantee forms. He legally bound my personal identity to your $2 million suburban mansion without my knowledge or consent." Vivian dropped the papers as if they were literally on fire. She covered her mouth with both hands, letting out a muffled, horrified gasp. "DeAndre, tell me she is lying," Vivian pleaded, turning to her son with tears streaming down her face. "Tell me you did not commit identity theft to buy my house." DeAndre refused to look at his mother. He stared straight down at his lap, his chest heaving, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles were visibly jumping. "Oh, he absolutely did," I answered for him. "And that is not even the worst of it. Jada Trey, let us talk about your highly successful high-fashion clothing boutique." Jada flinched violently, gripping the edges of her red folder. She looked down at the highlighted commercial lease agreements and the massive small business loan documents sitting in her lap. Her eyes darted back and forth across the pages, reading the fine print that she had clearly ignored when her brother handed her the paperwork a year ago. "You love to talk about how you are a self-made girl boss, Jada," I said, a cold, mocking smile touching the corners of my mouth. "You constantly belittled my career, calling me a broke accountant who lacked ambition. But your boutique has been bleeding money since the day you opened the doors. You could not even afford the commercial rent for the first 3 months, so DeAndre stepped in to save the day, just like the big, strong family patriarch he pretends to be." Jada's hands began to shake. Her sharp, aggressive demeanor completely crumbled as she stared at the forged signatures on the commercial loan documents. "He told us he secured corporate angel investors," Jada whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the undeniable evidence. "He said his management company was backing the boutique." "His management company was nothing but a fake LLC registered to a virtual post office box," I shot back. "He used the exact same forged documents. He took my social security number and my fabricated signature, and he guaranteed a $500,000 commercial business loan to keep your pathetic little store afloat. I am the sole financial guarantor for your entire life, Jada. Every single designer dress you bought, every single luxury vacation you took, it was all secretly funded by my stolen identity." Trey slammed his fist onto the table so hard the heavy wooden surface vibrated. He lunged across the corner of the table, grabbing DeAndre by the lapels of his wrinkled velvet suit. "You forged her signature," Trey roared, shaking his brother violently. "You tied our names to a massive fraudulent bank loan. Do you have any idea what you have done to us?" DeAndre shoved Trey away, desperately trying to fix his ruined jacket. "I was going to pay it all back," DeAndre yelled, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "I just needed some time to get the Vanguard funding. Once the $5 million credit line cleared, I was going to quietly refinance the house and the boutique under the company name. Nobody was ever supposed to find out. I was protecting our family." "You were protecting your own massive fragile ego," I snapped, my voice rising with absolute authority. "You wanted them to worship you. You wanted to sit at the head of the table at French restaurants and hand out Hermes bags like you were a king. And you were completely willing to risk my financial freedom to buy their cheap loyalty." "Mr. Harrison," my lead attorney cleared his throat, stepping forward to deliver the final lethal blow. The room instantly fell silent. The legal implications of DeAndre's actions were about to be laid completely bare. If this were simply a matter of local bank fraud, it would be serious enough. Mr. Harrison stated, his deep voice entirely devoid of emotion. However, Mr. DeAndre made a catastrophic jurisdictional error. The mortgage lender for Vivian's property is headquartered in New York. The commercial bank that issued the boutique loan is based in Delaware. When you submitted those forged electronic signatures and fabricated financial guarantees over the internet, you crossed state lines. DeAndre's eyes widened in pure, unadulterated terror. He finally understood exactly what was happening. He looked at Mr. Harrison, shaking his head slowly in denial. "No," DeAndre whispered. "Yes," Mr. Harrison confirmed brutally. "By transmitting fraudulent financial documents across state banking lines using a telecommunications network, you committed federal wire fraud. Because you executed these transactions on multiple different occasions for multiple different properties, you are looking at several distinct counts of aggravated identity theft and federal wire fraud." I leaned back in my leather chair, crossing my arms and watching the absolute devastation wash over the room. "The maximum penalty for a single count of federal wire fraud is 20 years in a federal penitentiary," I said softly, making sure every single syllable landed with maximum impact. "And you have committed at least 4 separate counts that my legal team has already fully documented." Vivian let out a loud, gut-wrenching wail. She slumped forward onto the mahogany table, burying her face in her arms, completely overcome by the sheer horror of the situation. Her perfect suburban life, her pristine church reputation, her fake upper-class status, it was all completely obliterated. She was not a wealthy matriarch. She was the direct beneficiary of a massive federal crime. Jada pushed her chair back violently, scrambling away from the table as if the red folder were physically burning her hands. She looked at DeAndre with an expression of pure, absolute hatred. "You ruined us!" Jada screamed, pointing a shaking finger at her brother. "You completely destroyed my life. I am going to lose my store. I am going to lose my home. I could go to prison just for signing those loan documents with you." DeAndre sat entirely frozen, staring blankly at the massive box of evidence sitting in the center of the boardroom table. The arrogant, smug businessman who had commanded his wife to take a public bus home from the hospital was completely gone. In his place was a broken, terrified criminal, staring directly at a lengthy prison sentence. Vivian slowly lifted her head from the table, her face streaked with heavy black mascara tears. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic realization. The woman she had mocked, the woman she had treated like absolute garbage, the woman she had complained brought a hospital smell into her luxury dinner, was the only thing standing between her and total destruction. She realized with horrifying clarity that her entire fake wealthy lifestyle, her home, her clothes, her son's supposed success was entirely built on federal crimes committed against the very woman sitting at the head of the table. "Nia, please," Vivian begged, her voice breaking into a pathetic, pathetic whimper. "Nia, please," Vivian begged, her voice breaking into a pathetic whimper. "You cannot send my son to prison. He is all I have. He is the head of our family. You are a mother now, Nia. You understand what it means to protect your child. Please have mercy on us. We will do anything you ask. Just do not call the authorities." I looked at Vivian, the woman who had spent 2 years treating me like a second-class citizen in my own home. I looked at Jada, who had mocked my career and paraded her stolen Hermes bag in my face. And I looked at DeAndre, the man who had abandoned me at the hospital and drained my savings to fund his pathetic illusion of wealth. I am a mother. I agreed, my voice completely devoid of any warmth or forgiveness. And as a mother, my first and only priority is protecting my daughter from parasites who would gladly steal her future to buy themselves luxury cars and expensive champagne. You do not understand the concept of mercy, Vivian. You only understand leverage. So here is my leverage. I reached out and placed my hand firmly on top of the massive cardboard box filled with their financial crimes. "I am giving you exactly 2 options." I announced, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "Option A is very simple. I pick up this box and hand it directly to my legal team. They walk out of this building and drive straight to the local FBI field office. We press full federal charges for wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud. DeAndre, you will easily face a minimum of 20 years in a federal penitentiary." DeAndre flinched violently, his face turning a sickly shade of pale gray. He looked down at the table, completely unable to meet my eyes. "And I am not stopping with him," I continued, turning my gaze to Vivian and Jada. "The federal prosecutors will look incredibly closely at where those stolen funds ended up. Vivian, Jada, you both directly received hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulently obtained loans. You benefited from a massive criminal enterprise. The FBI will seize your house, Vivian. They will seize your boutique, Jada. And they will very likely indict both of you as criminal accomplices for receiving stolen funds and participating in a conspiracy to commit bank fraud. You will lose absolutely everything, and you will very likely spend the next 5 to 10 years in a federal women's prison right alongside your brilliant son." Jada let out a sharp, horrified gasp, pressing her hands against her cheeks. "No!" she cried, shaking her head frantically. "No, I did not know the loans were fraudulent. He lied to me. I thought he was using his own money. I am innocent." "Ignorance is not a defense when you are sitting in a federal courtroom." "Jada," I replied coldly. "You signed the paperwork. You spent the money. You are just as guilty in the eyes of the law. So that is option A." A lengthy, highly public federal trial that will destroy your entire family's reputation and leave all of you rotting behind bars. The boardroom was dead silent. The only sound was the jagged, panicked breathing of the family who had thought they were untouchable just 24 hours ago. What is option B? DeAndre asked, his voice nothing more than a hollow, terrified croak. He did not look up from the table. I nodded to Ms. Pierce. She immediately stepped forward and produced 3 separate, thick legal documents, placing them meticulously on the mahogany table. Option B is complete and unconditional surrender, I said. You do not get to negotiate. You do not get to keep a single penny of my money. You sign these documents right here, right now. I pointed to the first document sitting in front of Vivian. That is a quitclaim deed for your house, Vivian. You are going to sign the entire property over to Vanguard Holdings today. We will assume the fraudulent mortgage to clear my name from the debt, and we will immediately liquidate the property to recoup our losses. You have exactly 24 hours to pack your personal belongings and vacate the premises. Vivian let out a heartbreaking sob, burying her face in her hands, but she did not argue. She knew she had absolutely no choice. I pointed to the second document sitting in front of Jada. That is a full transfer of ownership for your boutique, Jada. Vanguard Holdings is taking control of the commercial lease and all physical inventory. We will sell the business to cover the fraudulent loan you took out in my name. You are no longer a business owner. You are officially unemployed. Jada stared at the document, her eyes filled with angry, bitter tears, but she remained completely silent. She was trapped and she knew it. And finally, DeAndre, I said, pointing to the thickest document sitting directly in front of him. You are going to sign a full, legally binding confession detailing exactly how you committed the wire fraud and forged my signatures. This confession will remain securely in my private legal vault. If you or anyone in your family ever contacts me, ever mentions my name in public, or ever attempts to sue me for a single dime, I will immediately hand this signed confession to the FBI and trigger option A. DeAndre stared at the confession document, his hands shaking violently. You are destroying my life, he whispered. You destroyed your own life, DeAndre, I corrected him harshly. I am simply cleaning up the mess you left behind, but I am not finished. There is one more condition for option B. I leaned forward, making sure he heard every single word clearly. You are going to sign a full, unconditional surrender of all your parental rights to Maya, I commanded. You will have absolutely zero legal claim to my daughter. You will never see her, you will never contact her, and you will never attempt to be a part of her life. And once you sign these papers, all of you, DeAndre, Vivian, Jada, Trey, and Keisha, are going to pack whatever cheap belongings you have left, and you are going to leave the state of Georgia entirely. If my security team ever spots any of you within the city limits of Atlanta again, the deal is completely off, and the FBI gets the files. Leave the state, Vivian cried, looking up with a face entirely ruined by smeared makeup and tears. Nia, please, you cannot banish us. Our church is here. Our entire lives are here. Where are we supposed to go? That is entirely your problem, Vivian, I replied, my voice devoid of any sympathy. You spent years looking down on people who struggled. You thought your zip code made you inherently superior. Now you get to find out what it feels like to start over with absolutely nothing. You have exactly 2 minutes to decide. Option A or option B. I sat back in my leather chair, crossing my legs and watching the absolute destruction unfold. The ultimatum hung heavy in the room, completely suffocating them. They were staring down the barrel of total ruin, and the pressure was finally causing their fragile fake loyalty to completely shatter. Trey stood up first, grabbing a pen from the center of the table. He marched over to DeAndre and slammed the pen down onto the confession document. Sign it. Trey yelled, his face red with furious anger. Sign the damn papers, DeAndre, right now. DeAndre looked up at his brother, his eyes wide with betrayal. Trey, I am your brother, DeAndre pleaded. You cannot force me to give up my child. You cannot force me to sign a confession that ruins my life. You ruined our lives, Trey roared, jabbing a finger directly into DeAndre's chest. You lied to us. You stole her identity. You put Mom's house in jeopardy. You put Jada's business in jeopardy. I am not going to a federal prison because you wanted to play pretend billionaire. Sign the papers or I swear to God I will call the police myself and turn you in. Jada jumped up from her chair, joining Trey in his aggressive assault. She grabbed DeAndre's shoulder, shaking him violently. Do it, DeAndre! Jada screamed, her voice echoing shrilly in the massive boardroom. We are losing everything because of your pathetic greed. I am losing my store. Mom is losing her house. The least you can do is keep us out of a federal penitentiary. Sign the confession and give up the kid. You do not even care about the baby anyway. You left them at the hospital to go eat lobster. Just sign it. DeAndre looked desperately toward his mother, hoping for some kind of maternal defense, but Vivian simply looked away, refusing to meet his eyes. She picked up a pen with shaking hands and slowly pulled the quitclaim deed toward her. She was choosing her own freedom over her son's dignity. She was choosing to save herself. The entire facade of their tight-knit, wealthy family was completely obliterated. They were fighting like starving rats in a sinking cage, entirely willing to sacrifice each other to survive. DeAndre was completely isolated, entirely abandoned by the very people he had stolen my money to impress. He looked down at the thick legal documents sitting in front of him. The confession. The surrender of parental rights. He picked up the pen, his hand trembling so violently he could barely grip the plastic barrel. He looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with a hollow, devastating realization that he had completely and utterly lost. I watched him press the pen to the paper without a single ounce of regret. I watched him sign his entire fake life away, completely securing my daughter's future and ensuring they would never be able to touch us again. The parasite was finally being removed from my empire. The moment the tip of DeAndre's pen scratched against the thick parchment of the confession document, something inside Jada completely snapped. The polished veneer of the sophisticated independent business owner shattered into a million jagged pieces. She lunged across the corner of the heavy mahogany table, her hands curling into tight, furious fists. She did not yell. She shrieked an ugly, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated rage. Her hand lashed out, striking DeAndre directly across the face with a loud, violent crack that echoed off the glass walls of the penthouse boardroom. DeAndre gasped, his head snapping sharply to the side from the sheer, unexpected force of the blow. A bright red handprint immediately began to bloom across his dark cheek. He raised his arms defensively, trying to shield himself, but Jada was entirely out of control. "You selfish, arrogant pig," Jada screamed, grabbing the lapels of his ruined velvet suit and shaking him with terrifying, desperate strength. "You completely destroyed my life. You told me I was going to be the next major fashion mogul in Atlanta. You told me you had elite corporate investors lined up to franchise my boutique. I bragged to all my friends. I humiliated my rivals. And now I have to go back to my neighborhood and tell them my own brother used my store as a criminal front for federal wire fraud. I am going to be the absolute laughingstock of the entire city because of your pathetic, massive ego." "Jada," DeAndre pleaded, his voice breaking into a high-pitched whine as he tried to pry her perfectly manicured fingernails off his jacket. "Jada, please stop. I was trying to help you. I wanted us to be on top. I wanted us to be the wealthy power family you always talked about. You did not want to help me." Jada spat, her voice dripping with pure toxic venom. "You just wanted to look like a savior. You wanted everyone to bow down to you and kiss your feet. You are nothing but a fake. You are a cheap, broke hustler wearing a suit you cannot even afford to dry clean. I hate you, DeAndre. I wish you had never been born." She shoved him backward violently, sending him crashing hard against the back of his heavy leather executive chair. She turned her back on him, completely washing her hands of the brother she had praised as a brilliant genius just 24 hours ago. I watched DeAndre look desperately toward his mother. He was searching for a lifeline. He was looking for a single shred of the unconditional maternal love Vivian had constantly preached about during her Sunday church gatherings. But Vivian did not intervene to protect her golden child. She did not even look at his bruised cheek. She was too busy staring down at the quitclaim deed sitting in front of her, weeping loudly and entirely for herself. "My beautiful house," Vivian wailed, her voice trembling with intense, pathetic self-pity. my custom marble kitchen, my prized backyard rose garden. I am the elected head of the Neighborhood Homeowners Association. What am I supposed to tell the committee? What am I supposed to tell the pastor? They are going to permanently kick me out of the country club. I cannot go back to living in a cramped, cheap apartment complex. I am a woman of high social standing. Mom. DeAndre whispered, his eyes welling with fresh, hot tears. Mom, I did this for you. I bought that house so you would not have to work another day in your life. I wanted to give you the luxury lifestyle you always deserved. Please just look at me. Vivian finally raised her head, but the look in her eyes was not love or forgiveness. It was cold, hard resentment. You did not do this for me. Vivian hissed, her voice sharp and incredibly cruel. If you actually cared about me, you would have built a real legitimate business. You would have actually worked hard instead of stealing from your wife and forging my name on highly illegal documents. You made me look like a total fool, DeAndre. You made me brag to my entire congregation about a son who is actually nothing but a common federal criminal. DeAndre flinched as if she had physically stabbed him directly in the chest. Mom, please. He choked out a single heavy tear, tracking down his red, swollen cheek. Do not say that. I am your son. You are a massive disappointment. Vivian shot back aggressively, wiping her ruined mascara with the back of her trembling hand. You were supposed to be the man of the house. You were supposed to elevate this family name. Instead, you dragged us straight into the absolute gutter. I do not even know who you are anymore. You are entirely on your own in this mess. The absolute psychological destruction of DeAndre was agonizingly thorough. His mother, the woman whose approval he had desperately chased his entire life, had just explicitly told him he was only valuable as long as he provided her with luxury status symbols. The moment the money evaporated, so did her maternal affection. She did not care about his freedom or his soul. She only cared about her rose garden and her exclusive country club membership. As DeAndre sat there completely crushed under the overwhelming weight of his mother's cruel rejection, the final betrayal came from the most opportunistic member of the family. Keisha, who had been sitting quietly at the far end of the table, slowly pushed her chair back. She completely ignored her weeping mother and her furious brother. She adjusted her designer jacket, plastered a fake, overly bright smile onto her face, and walked directly toward my end of the mahogany table. Nia, Keisha said, her voice dripping with a sickeningly sweet tone that made my stomach physically churn. Nia, listen, you know, I always really liked you, right? I was the only one who actually tried to include you in family events. I never agreed with how Jada and Mom treated you. Jada whipped her head around, glaring at her younger sister in absolute disbelief. Excuse me? Jada shrieked, pointing an accusing finger. You were the one mocking her cheap clothes on your internet livestream last night, you lying snake. Keisha completely ignored Jada, keeping her desperate wide eyes locked directly on me. I only went along with their nasty behavior because DeAndre severely pressured me. Keisha lied smoothly, taking another step closer to my chair. He controlled all the money, so I had to play his stupid game. But I am not like them, Nia. I am a highly popular social media influencer. I have a massive online following. You are the chairwoman of Vanguard Holdings. You need young, vibrant voices to promote your properties and your corporate brand. I could be a highly paid brand ambassador for you. I could run your entire public relations department. Just give me a job, Nia. Please. I will completely distance myself from DeAndre today. I will block his phone number right now in front of you. DeAndre let out a broken, pathetic sob. Keisha, he gasped, reaching a trembling hand out toward his younger sister. I paid off your maxed-out credit cards. I bought you that luxury car. How can you do this to me? Keisha did not even glance in his direction. Shut up, DeAndre. Keisha snapped coldly, stepping further away from him. You do not have any money anymore. You are a complete legal liability to my personal brand. She turned back to me, her eyes wide and pleading like a starving dog begging for scraps. What do you say, Nia? We can be a power team. I will do whatever you want. I will post apologies online. I looked at Keisha with a profound, unyielding sense of disgust. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the thick mahogany table, and folded my hands together. Keisha, I said, my voice dropping to a low, terrifying register. You are a superficial, talentless leech. You do not have a brand. You have a fake internet persona built entirely on stolen money and rented luxury cars. I would not hire you to scrub the toilets in the Vanguard lobby. If you take one single step closer to me, I will have my security team physically throw you through the glass doors of this building. Go sit down and shut your mouth. Keisha's fake hopeful smile instantly vanished. Her face flushed bright crimson with absolute burning humiliation. She quickly scurried back to her chair, shrinking down into the leather, trying to make herself as physically small as possible. I turned my gaze back to DeAndre. The arrogant, swaggering entrepreneur was entirely gone. He was completely stripped bare. He had no money. He had no power. He had no fake corporate empire to hide behind. And most devastatingly, he had absolutely no family. In the span of 30 minutes, the exact people he had stolen for had completely abandoned him. They had physically attacked him, cursed his name, and shamelessly begged his enemy for a paycheck. They had ripped his fragile ego to shreds, leaving nothing but a pathetic crying shell of a man. He was completely and utterly isolated. He sat in the massive executive chair looking incredibly small, defeated, and entirely broken. "We are completely done here," I announced, my voice slicing cleanly through the heavy, miserable air of the boardroom. "Ms. Pierce, hand him the remaining documents right now." Ms. Pierce stepped forward with practiced efficiency, holding out a sleek silver pen and sliding the final stack of thick legal papers directly in front of DeAndre's trembling hands. "Sign them, DeAndre," I commanded, my tone leaving absolutely no room for hesitation. With shaking hands that could barely grip the silver pen, DeAndre pressed the ink to the paper. He signed the corporate confession, admitting to every single count of federal wire fraud and identity theft. He signed the massive stack of divorce papers, completely waiving any right to contest the proceedings or demand a single cent of spousal support. He signed the quitclaim deeds, officially transferring his mother's house and his sister's boutique directly into the complete legal control of Vanguard Holdings. And finally, with heavy tears dripping from his chin onto the crisp white parchment, he signed the absolute surrender of his parental rights. He legally erased himself from Maya's life forever. They are officially left with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs. Once the final signature was inked, I nodded to Mr. Harrison. He calmly gathered the massive stack of documents, sliding them back into the thick red folders and placing them securely inside the white banker box. The legal execution was completely finished. The parasite had been surgically removed. I looked at the 5 people sitting around my mahogany table. They looked like ghosts. Their faces were hollow, their eyes vacant, their postures completely slouched. They had entered this building believing they were untouchable conquerors, and they were leaving as entirely broken peasants. "Escort them out," I ordered, my voice echoing cleanly in the silent room. Mr. Harrison signaled the security detail. 4 massive men in dark suits stepped forward immediately, surrounding the family. "It is time to leave the premises," the lead guard said, his voice a deep, booming rumble. DeAndre slowly pushed his chair back. He looked at me one final time, opening his mouth as if he wanted to apologize or beg for a final shred of mercy. But the cold, dead expression on my face stopped him entirely. He closed his mouth, lowered his head, and turned away. The security guards marched them out of the boardroom down the long, plush hallway. They were escorted past the pristine glass offices filled with executives who stared at them with mild disdain. They were pushed straight into the private freight elevator, completely bypassing the luxurious main lobby. They were treated exactly like the trash they were. The heavy metal doors of the Vanguard Tower service exit slammed shut behind them, locking them out of my world forever. Down on the street level, the harsh morning sun offered absolutely no warmth. The cold November wind whipped through the downtown corridors, biting brutally through their wrinkled designer clothes. Jada shivered violently, wrapping her arms around herself. "We need to get out of here," Jada snapped, her voice raspy from screaming earlier. "DeAndre, call us an Uber right now. I am not standing on the sidewalk like a homeless person." DeAndre pulled his phone from his pocket, his hands still shaking slightly. He swiped the screen, but nothing happened. He tapped the power button frantically. "It is dead," he muttered. Keisha rolled her eyes and pulled out her own phone. "Give it to me. I will call a black car," Keisha said. But as she looked at her screen, her face completely dropped. "I do not have any service." Keisha panicked, tapping the screen aggressively. "It says, my line is disconnected." Vivian pulled out her phone with the exact same result. "The family plan," DeAndre whispered, his eyes widening in fresh horror. Apex Lifestyle Management paid the cell phone bills. When Nia liquidated the company accounts, the carrier shut off all the lines. "We do not have any cell service." Trey cursed loudly, kicking the side of a metal trash can. "Fine," Trey yelled, pulling his wallet out. "Just flag down a taxi. I have my debit card. I will pay for the ride to a cheap motel until we figure this out." A yellow taxi pulled up to the curb a moment later. Trey yanked the door open and handed his card to the driver through the partition to process the upfront fare. A few seconds later, the driver shook his head and tossed the card back out the window. "Declined," the driver shouted before peeling away from the curb. Trey stared at the plastic card in his hand, completely stunned. "The joint accounts," Trey realized, his voice dropping to a horrifying whisper. "DeAndre tied our personal checking accounts to the boutique collateral." She froze everything. They stood on the freezing pavement, entirely paralyzed by the absolute totality of their ruin. They had no cash. They had no credit. They had no cell phones. And because Vanguard Holdings had officially repossessed the boutique inventory in Vivian's house earlier that morning, my security team had already boxed up their basic personal necessities in thick black industrial trash bags and dumped them by the service exit. Vivian, Jada, Keisha, Trey, and DeAndre were forced to walk over to the dirty alleyway and pick up those black plastic bags, slinging them over their shoulders like common vagrants. "Where do we go?" Vivian wept, clutching her trash bag to her chest. "How do we get out of the city?" DeAndre looked up, his eyes scanning the busy street. There was only one option left. Right across the intersection, standing directly in front of the hospital where I had given birth just 2 days prior, was the public transit station. It was the exact same bus stop DeAndre had ordered me to walk to when I was bleeding and holding our newborn daughter. "We have to take the bus," DeAndre said, his voice completely hollowed out. Jada looked at the crowded, dirty bus shelter and burst into fresh, angry tears. "I am not riding the city bus," Jada screamed. "I am wearing vintage Chanel. You cannot make me get on that thing." "We do not have a choice," Jada Trey snapped, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the crosswalk. "Walk." The 5 of them dragged their feet across the asphalt, carrying their garbage bags, shivering in the cold wind. They stood shoulder to shoulder with the exhausted commuters they had spent their entire lives mocking. Vivian kept her head down, entirely terrified that someone from her prestigious church congregation might drive by and see her standing at a public bus stop holding a garbage bag. When the heavy diesel engine of the city bus roared up to the curb, the doors hissed open, releasing a blast of stale, warm air. The driver demanded exactly $2.50 per person in exact change. They had to frantically dig through their pockets, scraping together loose coins and crumpled dollar bills just to afford the basic fare. DeAndre was the last one to step onto the bus. He looked back up at the towering glass facade of the Vanguard building one final time. He finally understood the massive empire he had lost. Then the heavy folding doors violently snapped shut right in his face. The bus lurched forward, carrying the ruined family away into the absolute obscurity they entirely deserved. High above the noisy, polluted streets, I stood in the absolute perfect silence of my penthouse office. The floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire city of Atlanta. The sprawling skyline, the bustling highways, the luxury commercial districts, it all stretched out beneath my feet. A soft knock echoed from the heavy oak door. Uncle Ray stepped into the office carrying a small bundle wrapped in a soft pink cashmere blanket. He smiled warmly, handing Maya over to me. "She is wide awake and completely perfect," Uncle Ray said softly. I took my daughter into my arms, holding her close to my chest. The physical pain of my surgery was completely gone, entirely replaced by a profound, unshakable sense of peace. I looked down at Maya's beautiful dark eyes. She was safe. Her future was entirely secured. She would never have to know the toxic, manipulative cruelty of the people who shared her father's bloodline. I walked closer to the glass window, looking down at the tiny yellow taxis and city buses crawling like ants along the pavement far below. Generational wealth is not just about the money sitting in a secure bank account. It is about having the absolute power to protect your peace. It is about possessing the undeniable strength to build an impenetrable fortress around the people you actually love. For 2 entire years, I tried to shrink myself to fit into a family that only valued me for what they thought they could extract. I played small because I thought it would earn their genuine affection. I bought into the toxic narrative that as a strong Black woman, I had to suffer in absolute silence and endure constant abuse just to keep a broken family together. But parasites do not know how to love. They only know how to feed. When you find yourself surrounded by people who constantly belittle your worth, steal your energy, and demand your absolute sacrifice while offering absolutely nothing in return, you have to cut them off. You have to slice the dead weight completely out of your life without a single ounce of hesitation or regret. Family is not defined by shared DNA or a legal marriage certificate. Family is defined by loyalty, respect, and mutual protection. I am Nia Washington. I am the sole chairwoman of Vanguard Holdings, and I will never apologize for destroying the monsters who tried to steal my daughter's crown. Thank you so much for watching my story today. If you have ever had to completely cut off toxic family members to protect your own peace and secure your future, I want to hear from you. Tell me your survival stories in the comments below. Have you ever had a partner or a family member completely underestimate your worth? How did you reclaim your power? Do not forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another empowering story of karma and absolute justice. Share this video with anyone who needs a strong reminder that they do not have to tolerate abuse just because someone calls themselves family. Remember, your worth is never determined by the people who are too blind to see your true value. Stay strong, protect your peace, and always build your own empire. I will see you in the next video.